Yes. Yes, I've already practiced. But old habits don't seem to die very well, so I've practiced.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the February 20th General Work Session of the Wake County Board of Public Education, Wake County Public School System. We're here today. We have a quorum of members present. Dr. Ng will be joining us shortly. And so we will dive right into our agenda, where I am seeing a blast from the past. Dr. Lloyd Gardner, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be back and to see all of you.
So I don't see the ghost of Christmas past on the agenda. So I take it, are you leading or are you here in a support role?
Very much in a support role.
Okay, then. Well, the first item on our agenda are the Advanced Teaching Roles Grant and Teacher and Lead Schools Grant. And so I will leave it then to our more present staff to go from here.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Board Chair Hegarty, Superintendent Taylor, and members of the board. My name is Cheryl Stidham, and I'm the Senior Director for Talent Management and Human Resources. And I'm here also on behalf of Dr. Mutillo, who is homesick today, so he's sorry he couldn't be with you. But I am here to present about the Teacher and School Leader Incentive Program. This is a federal grant that we applied for and received. Just wanted to give you a little background information before diving in. We named it Project Leaders, Leaders standing for Leveraging Employee Advancement to Develop Excellence and Reach Success. And this is a grant that is sponsored by the U.S. Department of Education. It's a part of the, actually the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education. And it was first offered in 2020. We actually applied for it around that time, and we did not win that year, but we came back this past, over the summer, reapplied and did win the grant. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the grant. The two primary purposes of the TSL grant are to assist in the implementation, improvement, and the expansion of human capital management systems and performance-based compensation. And so essentially, human capital is all of the things that we do in human resources. It is recruitment, it's retention, it's employee data collection, and then certainly performance-based compensation, exactly what it says, but it's really tied to student achievement and what that looks like, and also how we can retain high-quality staff. So certainly tied directly to the strategic plan that we are working towards, especially in human resources. So we were notified in October that we were winners of the grant, and it began October 1, and this is a 3-year grant cycle. We were awarded $13.5 million to do this work, and so we want to just be able to share a little bit about what that work is and what it will look like over the next 3 years. So we have two main goals for the project, and that is certainly to impact student achievement in our schools that have been designated as low performing, either by their school performance grade and then other identifying criteria, and to recruit, retain, and develop a diverse teaching and school leader workforce in those identified schools and across the district. So those are the two main goals that we will be focusing on. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Are you guys on the project leader's objectives there? Okay, sorry about that. I'm advancing mine and not yours. So what you'll see here are the four main objectives that are outlined for our grant. This really helps us to identify what our goals will be in terms of over the next 3 years, what we plan to accomplish. Again, the human capital management system, and that is to increase diverse teaching workforce, but then also to increase transparency in the hiring process. So I think you're familiar, but if you're not, we now have a new applicant platform called iCIMS, and iCIMS will allow us a lot more transparency in the process and the length it takes to hire folks in Wake County so they can see exactly where they are in the process. It will allow us to also be able to tap into some of our vacancy data more readily than the current way we're collecting it. So it can do a lot more than our previous system. And so that's one of the major objectives. In addition to that, typically the only way you know about becoming a Wake County employee is if you come to our website. And so we are working with a marketing firm called NAS, and there's a software that they use called Activate, and so that will help us to expand our recruitment efforts and our advertising and marketing efforts. So we're really looking forward to being able to do that as a part of this grant. Certainly increasing educator diversity is another priority for us. So again, being able to look at that data that we have in our current staff and then increasing that in not just in the schools that are identified, but across the board. Growing a teacher pipeline and teacher preparation. And so we want to ensure that we are attracting high quality staff that will be able to prepare our students for success, especially in those schools that have been identified by the grant. And then certainly we want to be able to pour into the folks that we're hiring. So we want to build sustainable models of professional development as well as career advancement to assist the staff who are working with these students. All right. So what you can see there is kind of the selection criteria that was used. Again, the criteria from the grant requirements were that high needs. That's how they identified what schools needed to be selected for the school districts. And so what we did was we looked at any of our schools that had a performance grade of C through F, and then any one of the other criteria that you see there, whether that be a growth index, underrepresented minority students, Restart, Title I, or a higher than district average attrition rate. So that's the turnover rate. There were 24 schools that were selected. We had approximately 60 schools that were eligible. We did work with a researcher from UNC Chapel Hill, and he was a member of our grant writing team as well as our implementation team. I worked in collaboration with our data research and accountability group to identify who those schools were, and then we did a random selection process to select the 24. So we do have 24 what we will consider our treatment schools, and then we have 24 schools that are in a control group as well. You'll see here on the map the 24 schools that were selected. This will impact over 13,000 students, 1,100 teachers, and 69 school leaders. And so you'll notice that it spans from the east and northeast all the way to the southeast, with some schools in the central and western area as well as the northern area there. So we're really excited about the variation of schools that we have, and from the different areas that they're coming from. They're all elementary and middle schools, just to make you aware of that as well. So what does the human capital management system mean, and what does that mean for us? And so when we think about improving that, certainly we are focused on these 24 schools, but this grant will allow us to do this work district-wide. And so we're looking again at the software that I spoke about earlier, which not only includes the new application platform, iCIMS. One of the things that we have found out is that it is much easier for our candidates to apply through this process. It's a much easier application process. I think that will lead to higher application rates. And then it will also allow us to use the NAS marketing company to do ads such as Facebook, use Indeed, use different platforms, and then we can also recruit outside of North Carolina and in different parts of the country if we choose. So if we want to market specific areas for specific positions, we have the ability to do that as well through that work. They will then provide us with all the metrics to see how well are we doing. You know, how many folks are we attracting from those different marketing campaigns that we implement as a part of this management system. Again, radio and social media advertising. We've got a radio spot that will be going out soon to advertise about our career fair coming up in March. So that's just one example of how these federal funds will be used. And then, of course, they will sponsor specific job postings, so we'll be able to highlight specific jobs with them. These 24 schools will be obviously one of those highlights that will be provided through our careers page and through their platform. And then we will be able to, for the first time, I've been in HR for 7 years now, for the first time since I've been a part of the team, expand our recruiting team beyond one person. So we had one recruiter, so now we will be able to have more than one recruiter. So we're excited about that opportunity. As an additional component of the human capital management system, we get the opportunity to offer recruitment and retention bonuses to staff that go into these schools and to the school leaders. Again, it's only for teachers and school leaders. That's the caveat of the grant. But you'll notice there that we are essentially proposing a $1,500 it paid out twice. One, it would be like a recruiting bonus, and then one at the end of the grant cycle in 2026, if they're still at the school, a retention bonus. So for a total of $3,000 for the teachers, and also for the assistant principals, and then $2,500 at the beginning of this grant cycle as a recruitment bonus, and then again, retention at the end, so $5,000 for each of the school leaders in those schools. And And then, in addition to that, there's an opportunity for these teachers who exceed growth with their students to be given a $2,000 bonus for those in those areas that we do have EVOS data, and as well as for the principal and the assistant principal if the school exceeds growth. So there will certainly be some opportunities there. Again, our partnership with our researcher from UNC Chapel Hill helped to provide us with a lot of research around, the data and the information around retention and recruitment bonuses and so forth. So that was very helpful. I think what many of us are most excited about is the opportunity around professional learning and the pathways for the staffs at these schools. And so we're going to be able to pour a lot into these teachers to help them to, if they're not quite at high quality standard, be able to certainly help them get there, and then to maintain that high quality status. And so there will be opportunities for them to not only attend professional development, but if the professional development should happen outside the school day, whether it be in the evenings or over the summer, we can provide stipends for them to do that. Anyone who's interested in pursuing their national board certification, we will be able to offer that opportunity and reimburse them for the costs of that. Same as we have in these 24 schools, we do have quite a few that might be on an alternate license, and they need to go back to, whether through residency or whatever, to gain their license. And so for those teachers, we'll be able to help them with tuition assistance and praxis reimbursement. So we're incredibly excited because, again, that is a key retention strategy for those teachers. And then for those folks that may be teacher leaders or may be considering going into leadership, if they want to go back and get their master's in teaching or their master's in school administration, or for our school leaders who may want to pursue a doctorate in educational leadership, there will be an opportunity for us to support tuition reimbursement as well for them. And finally, we want to make sure that we can provide all of these things, but more importantly, we can support them and we can support the implementation. And so there is an additional 2 staff members. One will be a coordinating teacher in human resources that will work specifically with those 24 schools, the beginning teachers in those schools and all the state requirements and laws around our beginning teachers, but also a coordinating teacher in the Office of Professional Learning who will help us to facilitate and ensure that there is alignment around what professional development, that not only are we offering all of these schools, but that there is alignment to their school improvement plans as well. So that's very important to us. So in terms of next steps, we have a implementation team. The team is made up of members of a lot of central service departments, from academics, data research and accountability, to our Office of Professional Learning, to the superintendent, area superintendent's office, as well as a couple representatives from the school themselves. And so we are currently looking at and prioritizing our logic model and the steps for implementation. Many of them that I've already shared with you, some of those things have already been checked off in terms of the implementation of the marketing platform and the application platform, getting some of these positions hired. And so now we're moving into the implementation phase of starting to identify some of the key components for professional learning and so forth and so on. So we do have that team. That team meets twice monthly, the first and third Wednesday of every month. And so we've met 3 times already as we're getting this grant rolled out. And then we're working with the Office of Communications to build a communication plan so that we can promote and advertise, the good work that is happening already in these schools, but hopefully with the funding from this grant, the even better work that we're going to be able to do. We also want to be able to communicate that there is opportunity for recruitment and retention bonuses. There's opportunity for, professional development stipends and career advancement stipends, because that may attract current staff to potentially move into one of these schools or attract outside folks into Wake County Public Schools. So we definitely are working with communications to advertise that externally. And then internally, we're going to use, our Wake Connect and our other messaging systems with our all-staff email and our principal messaging, and then build a collaborative site in Wake Connect so that our principals and the implementation team readily have access as we continue to add and build the grant out towards implementation, full implementation. So that is where we are. Any questions?
All right, thank you, Ms. Stidham. I don't know if folks had a chance to review any of the materials before the meeting, but obviously, we've got a fantastic program here. Do we have any questions or comments from board members? Mr. Hershey.
I have a couple, I'll probably need to come back. A couple of things. You mentioned the reimbursement for the National Board certification. Why reimbursement versus upfront covering the cost of?
Actually, that's a conversation we just had yesterday, and we learned from our coordinator for national boards that we can set up a third-party vendor. And we do have one school that is currently doing that. That's a Restart school. So if we choose to go that route where they would bill us, the National Board Organization would bill us, we can do that. So that's something that we're looking at right now. So that way, when we have the number of teachers who would like to pursue national boards, rather than them paying it, they would invoice the district, and we would be able to pay it on their behalf rather than they pay out of pocket.
I would like to give wholehearted support for that approach instead. I mean, when we talk about an equity policy filtering through the system, we're going to have teachers who can't afford, we think only $2,000 a year, but
Right.
that's
It's
also a lot when
It is.
we have a state that doesn't pay teachers well.
Yeah, so we were really excited to hear that information from her yesterday.
Okay, fantastic. That checks off a huge box for me. Can you just go back to the one recruiter comment? Is that for the entire district?
So we have had one recruiter for the district, Jason Kennedy is who it's been. Now, he certainly leans on other members of Human Resources, other school-based leaders that will help him do recruiting. So whether he's attending a recruiting, a job fair at a university, for example, or a regional job fair, perhaps in like the Michigan area or New York he used to go to, he will take individuals with him to represent the district, but he is the Office of Recruiting.
Any idea of how comparable sized districts, how many recruiters or what their staff may look like?
It's been a while, but I know that.
Someone stood up over there.
Yes. Do you know this? I think there were approximately, like Charlotte used to have a team of 6 or 9.
So we have one and other, okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Hershey?
Yeah, other districts, and Charlotte is a reasonable proximate example, have significantly more resources, human resources, in their human resource department. I believe it was 2 years ago, we included within the operating budget a request for, I think it was 5 or 6 different positions for all of HR. And HR is a lot more than just recruiting, as everyone knows. But I had gone back at the time, to, I believe it was the 2007, 2008 year, and looked at the number of months of employment, because that's how we track things, that were assigned to our human resource department back in that 2007-8 timeframe, and compared it to when we brought that request forward a couple years ago, and I think we had added 6 months of employment. And during that same period of time, we went from about 130 some schools to pushing 200,
Right.
and from about 16,000 employees to 20,000. I believe you will see in the superintendent's proposed budget possibly some additional requests for staffing.
Got it. Last two quick things. The implementation of the new software system, have we not been doing some of that, or is that simply just stating that as part of the new system, we are going to be having to do it again, sort of thing? You list it like organized lead contact, deliver targeted
Right.
messages.
Right. So our communications department did have kind of an initial phase with NAS around revising and revamping our careers page. And so I know that they have worked with them. They've done some different marketing campaigns for bus drivers, so forth and so on. And so I think this will allow us to really expand those efforts. And then it will, and unfortunately, prior to the grant, we did not have the data analytics piece. And so that now will be provided as a part of this. So now we can really see, and pinpoint exactly where those recruiting efforts are most fruitful for us, so that we can go back to those places and go back to those different campaigns, because that's where we seem to be getting, a high number of candidates for the different positions.
Okay. My last point for right now is, as we begin the conversations around sustainability, perhaps amongst this board in a pretty short time frame, I would like us to be thinking about the aspects of this grant that are successful, not just in the 3-year time period, but how do we sustain them? And to build out programs that are sustainable beyond 2026, even if grants aren't necessarily designed to be that. If we have something great, as a board, how do we sustain it? But you didn't have to answer
No,
that.
no, but you brought a good point,
Yes.
and I wanted to share that we will evaluate the grant. We actually are getting ready to send an RFP out. Our data research and accountability team is helping us draft that. We actually have a draft ready to go. We will have 2 different evaluation firms that will, assess the work that we do and the results that, we gain over the next 3 years. And so I think that will be really valuable information to tell us what worked, what didn't work, what do we need to continue. I can't say enough about the team in our grants office that helped to identify the availability of this grant, helped us write this grant, and are active members of the team. And so they're the ones that kind of kept their eyes open and saw that it was re-released for us to reapply. If it, in 3 years, it's open again, we will more than actually, Dr. Matillo said we will apply again. But we will certainly look at that, because I think that's incredibly important. I know, as my former experience as a principal, that sustainability is key. So
Thank you,
Thank you.
and well done getting this grant.
thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hershey. Mr. Swanson?
Thank you, Chair Haggerty, and I also just want to echo congratulations, and this is very exciting. So very looking forward to supporting. I just have a couple of questions. As relates to the National Board certification, are there any stipulations for folks that are required, that are getting their national boards? If we're covering that expense, are we stating that, you have to teach with us for a certain amount of years, so therefore there's some accountability on both ends? So that's my first question. I'll give you all some time to.
Yeah. So that's the purpose of our implementation team right there. So when we drafted wrote the grant and included some of these incentives and career advancement opportunities, there certainly is an opportunity for us to figure out and outline what those processes and parameters will be, which is in part why we did the recruitment and retention we split it, right, on the front end and on the back end. It's that retention piece. We want you to stay. We're going to pour into you, and we want you to give back to our students. And so certainly as we think through, whether it be national board or tuition reimbursement, whatever that looks like, what are those expectations then upon completion of that? And then, and what might that application process look like, and who gets what, and how much do you get? We currently have tuition reimbursement already in the district, but it's just a set pot of money, and I know my colleague in HR, she waits and looks to see, okay, how many people have applied for it, and then she tries, from an equity standpoint, let me divvy it up across everybody who's applied, and she does it semester. So those are the things the implementation team will be looking at. And we have them really kind of divided out as a team, folks that are focusing on the human capital priority, and then folks that are focusing on the performance space, which is the career advancement and professional learning, and that's what they're focusing on, developing.
Well, I would love to just see some language that kind of lays that out. So therefore, on the front end, those expectations are very clear, and folks understand, the expectations are there. My next question was about the advanced degrees piece. I know when we did the master's pay, there was, everyone was excited. I was excited that we were able to implement this, but it seemed that those staff members that had advanced degrees may or may not been able to receive that additional pay because of what their degree was in. So I'm wondering if there is a certain list of degrees that, that would fall into that category that could also be lifted up front. So folks, again, understand that this degree meets this requirement that the district has laid out instead of someone getting a degree in an MPA or something, which I'm taking a jab because that's what I'm getting. So I'll just use mine for an example. But if I don't teach social studies or something that's along with an MPA, just make sure that those teachers are getting the best bang for their buck, because if you're going back to advance your degrees or further your education, we should find a way to support them as much as we can, but just make sure that, again, that there are some very clear guidelines on what degrees are acceptable and what degrees are not. And I think those were the last two pieces. But again, I'm grateful for you all's work on this, and just wanted to add those little nuggets there.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that feedback. And certainly, I know when we did advanced degrees, we ensured that we were aligned to the state requirements, and I can't imagine we would veer away from that. But articulating what those are in advance of somebody that's maybe going to apply to go back to school is certainly important. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Ms. Caulfield?
Thank you for that. I guess my first question, Sam asked in a different way, but I just want to back up what Mr. Hershey said, that I think that it's important that we pay attention to the fact that some of these teachers may want to but can't afford to. So if we can support them in that way. So this is a grant, a three-year grant that'll roll out between 24 schools. If we do see, which I'm pretty sure with professional development, that's what everybody keeps asking for. So I'm hoping and thinking we're going to see some great success. Are we starting now? I guess this is also going on with what he said. How long would it take to implement before we could see that in all of our schools? Or is that something even on our plan just yet?
I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to speak to that in terms of, what that may look like across the district. I do think that this grant, and I think the grant that you're going to hear about next, certainly gives us an opportunity of a couple different models. And I think we'll be able to use the data and the research that we get back from the evaluation team about, what works, and then what do we need to implement beyond that. I think that's one of the components I'm certainly most excited about when we think about these grant opportunities, and how that will be able to broaden the scope in which we will be able to touch all staff. Ultimately, that is certainly our goal.
Right. So I think mine is more of a proactive thought, that we could think about that as we go along. That, we're doing it for 24 schools, but all in all, right, that would be our goal, right?
Sure, absolutely.
And Ms. Caulfield, I would just add, grants are frequently an opportunity to test drive, if you will, a situation in these 24 schools, or let's say the test drive. We'll learn through the process. We'll learn what works, what was successful. We'll learn what didn't work, what the challenges were. We'll also determine what the actual funding utilized is over the period. And then if we find it to be successful and want to broaden the scope of implementation across the district, being the money guy, the first thing that comes to my mind, we'd have to identify a source of funding.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. And I just wanted to say, slide 9 kind of sums up my next comment, really, more not a question, but I'm definitely thankful for, it includes subs as well. That is definitely something that we're seeing a big need for, especially since COVID. And a lot of times, their professional development, because they are just either filling in a class or a long-time fill-in. But I'm very happy to see that they were included on that. So that's just really more of a comment. But I love all those supports on page 9.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Caulfield. Ms. Edmonds?
Thank you. If I understood you correctly, I want to move quickly because I know we've got more to get to. If I understood you correctly on slide 5, Wake County Public Schools, like your team added an additional criteria to those A through F school letter grades. Is that correct? That was our call to do that?
So we looked at all available schools who met the federal initial, which was high needs defined by free and reduced. So any of our schools that were 50 plus 1% free and reduced lunch count, and we looked at all of those across the board. And then from there, we were able to identify what were some of the common attributes of those schools.
Thanks. I'm a harsh critic of our North Carolina A through F school letter grades because they don't reflect growth
Right.
as they should. And so the fact that we used other criteria, and that was the point of my
I
question.
led one of those schools, so I
Yeah,
agree
so,
with you.
I know. Anyway, the additional $2,000 bonus for growth, based on student growth, that's a one-time additional thing?
Correct.
For
Each
okay.
year, correct.
Each year of the grant? Okay. And then slide 9, a little bit of a different question. I wanted to know, with the professional learning that is in addition to what already exists, is this going to be built into existing teacher workdays, or is this, my concern is how much more time is this going to require of these educators? Do you know what I'm saying?
I do.
Like outside their school day? So what does that
Absolutely.
look like if you can?
So we're building that, right? But one of the asks that we made of our building principals when they were communicating just some initial conversations about this, because a lot of them are starting to get some information about teacher intentions for next year and staffing, and we really emphasize that, you know, remaining at this school through 26 is going to add additional requirements or expectations of you because you are at a grant school. And so by getting this recruitment and retention bonus, by being eligible for all of the other incentives, that's going to be part of the requirement, is that you participate in those professional development opportunities. I think that, you know, Mary and I have had some initial conversations about implementation, right? We know that there are going to be some things that all 24 schools will need and will benefit from, and to be able to train them all at the same time is not going to be possible. So what does that look like, and how will we be able to roll that out? Which is, I think, why we're most excited about the opportunity that if we have to do outside the workday, we will be able to compensate those teachers above and beyond for attending that training.
Okay, so it's something that's clearly communicated as an
Correct.
expectation.
Yeah.
All right, and then my last question is, you already mentioned that we can apply for the grant again because our hope, collective hope, is that this will make a big impact at these 24 schools, right? But those 24 schools may still need some additional assistance at the end of the grant. So one solution is to apply again. I would hope that any of the 24 could still get it. It wouldn't have to be a set of new schools. But, and this will be more of a comment, I hope you're in conversation that if we don't get a second grant, that we sort of try to build in these supports, especially if we see that they're working.
Correct. Right.
Like, yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you
you.
for that feedback, and I can tell you that, you know, I think you are all aware of Restart School and their flexibility, and so as we see some of these that work, those are things that our Restart schools can implement with lap salary and additional funding that they have at their schools, and I had that conversation already with one of the area superintendents about his school, that, you know, this principal may be able to do these exact same things at her school, even though she's not a part of the grant. So.
Thank you. But I guess what it comes down to then is if the resources are available to make an impact, right? It's why you don't take the grant money and spread it over all the schools.
Right.
Because by the time you reduce it down, you wouldn't be able to do as much as you're able to do with this. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Mr. Hershey, did you have any concluding comments?
No, I was going to sort of touch on what you were saying, but also to what Ms. Caulfield said. I believe it was Superintendent Moore's last meeting where she said that maybe we need to reevaluate how we hire. I have to go back and look, but I remember it pretty well that it was a discussion about, should it be, you know, just principal-driven to go out and find people, or do we have to reconsider as a district how we go about that? So that's it. Wonderful job. Thank you for the
Thank you.
presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stidham.
Thank
you,
you.
team.
Hopefully they can turn on the presentation again. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Haggerty and Superintendent Taylor and board members. We are here to speak about the Advanced Teaching Roles Grant. I'm Mary Bohr. I'm the Senior Director in the Office of Professional Learning. And Dr. Gardner, who you all noticed, is our grant manager for this grant. So in this grant, there's a couple different things that this grant really works on. One is expanding teacher leadership roles, and it really focuses on keeping high-quality teachers in the classroom and in the building. It also gives students access to excellent teaching, and it works on increasing teacher retention by supporting beginning teachers, alternative licensure teachers, and growing all classroom teachers. There are a number of school districts that have had this grant already going on, and we've kind of listed those, but also the additional districts, which you can see Wake is one of those. They're to the right. So we selected 6 schools to participate in our grant, and as we looked for schools, we made sure, first of all, to not choose any of the TSL schools, and we looked at schools that had Title I status, had restart status, or were anticipating restart status. They had current student achievement scores that showed that they had a need for something more. They were recommended by their area superintendent, and we wanted to make sure that the leaders were ready for that work as well. And there was an opportunity to opt in and opt out of this grant. And so the 6 schools on the right were chosen to participate. This grant has 3 basic positions as part of the grant. One is a position that all schools would choose. It is called a multi-classroom leader, and it is a teacher leader position, and we'll kind of explain that next. And then there are 2 optional positions. One is called a team reach teacher, which if you think of it kind of like a co-teacher, that's a good description of it. And the other one is a reach associate, which is like an instructional assistant leader. The multi-classroom leader, this would be someone with a record of high student growth over time. So at least 2 out of 3 years blue EVAS growth. And they would be hired to lead a teaching team. They would be kind of in charge of lesson planning, data analysis for that team, instructional changes. They would create like an intervention system and a tutoring culture within the building. They would coach team members. So if you think of them as somebody that co-plans, co-teaches, they model best practices, and they typically continue to teach at least some portion of the school day. So in my mind, I always think of the multi-classroom teacher as you're taking an excellent teacher that's had a history of high growth, and you're multiplying their impact, so now it's reaching other classrooms and other teachers. There is a pay differential with this position because it comes with a lot of increased responsibility. And you can see they are paid $12,000 to $15,000 extra a year, and that differential is based on how many teachers they're in charge of. So somebody that's in charge of 3 would get less than somebody that's in charge of 8 teachers. Now, the great news is that $10,000 of this is coming from state funding right now. The state is really behind multi-classroom leaders. They're seeing a big impact around the state from this program. And then $2,000 to $5,000, so the remaining funds would be coming from school funding sources like Title I or Restart funds. The next position is called a team reach teacher. This is an optional position for schools to choose. So always with multi-classroom leaders, they have teachers that work with them, but for some of the schools, it means that team reach teacher might teach additional students because the multi-classroom leader has to be freed up a little bit during their day in order to model and support and do all this other work. If they teach additional students, then there's a pay differential associated with that. So $5,000 extra is what those teachers would receive. $3,000 of that is from state funding, and then $2,000 of it would be from school funding sources, Title I and Restart. The last position is optional as well. That's the REACH Associate. That's that instructional assistant who supports the MCL. This instructional assistant would focus on small group tutoring. They would be someone to carry on the work of the MCL in their classroom when the MCL might be stepping out to model a lesson or to support another teacher. The pay differential for this position is $3,000, and this would all be from school funding sources. This position is not included in the state funding. So the great news about this is that for schools that have used this model, they are seeing a big increase in student proficiency scores, typically going about 27% higher on proficiency scores in those classrooms. And remember, that's not just for the multi-classroom leader. That person probably saw that kind of scores, but now we're seeing that spread throughout a grade level or throughout a subject area. Thank you. So the next steps, kind of looking forward with this grant, we have 6 schools that are working right now with their design teams within the school. They're looking at student performance needs, staffing structures, the funding that they're going to be using, and they're creating this design plan. Schools will also be hiring multi-classroom leaders soon. And then some of the principals and multi-classroom leaders will participate in professional learning to help better prepare them for implementing this model. And then this next school year, we will be starting the implementation at our 6 schools. So I'm not sure if anyone has any questions about the Advanced Teaching Roles Grant.
All right, any questions? Dr. Ray?
Thank you so much. I was very excited to read this last night, and also just wanted to kind of, I'm glad that you mentioned at the end about the, looking at the student as really the ultimate endpoint. And I just want to make sure that we are looking at metrics that are going to be measuring those. And if you're doing metrics, are you looking at it on an ongoing basis, or is it kind of like when the project is finished, then you look at the results? How are you going to be implementing that?
That's a great question. Actually, we look at the metrics all across time, so it's not just at the closure of the grant. And the MCLs, those multi-classroom leaders, they have to be able to see results. The minute we don't see results, they don't stay in those positions. So it's definitely results-oriented.
And to just add to that for your information, the metrics that schools are now going through the process of establishing for the next school year include student performance metrics, but they also include teacher perception, teacher satisfaction, the team satisfaction, the school impact of how this model permeates throughout the school, not only the grade level, but the school. So we are designing those metrics of success with each school with that in mind.
Yeah, I think that's a very synergistic in a way, those teachers and the students and how successful they are, and so yeah.
All right, thank you. Mr. Swanson?
Thank you. Thank you again for this exciting initiative as well, and it's very excited to see that our instructional assistants are also a part of this, because our instructional assistants play a significant role in the well-being of our students, and they're not just babysitters. They are trained professionals who are able to give that one-on-one to our students who may need to be pulled out in certain groups. I'm very grateful for that. And also just excited to see how this aligns back to our strategic plans, back to our priorities, back to our goals, and back to our aims. So for me, that's that accountability model that we can look at, in addition to whatever the grants have laid out as well. So just very excited about these initiatives, and hopefully this will help recruit and retain some outstanding educators to join us here in Wake County. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, any further question or comment? All right, well, thank you, Ms. Bohr. Thank you, Dr. Gardner. It's great to see you again. Great to see you. And we appreciate all the wonderful news about these programs. Thank you. All right, the next item on our agenda for the work session is a discussion of the Jewel and Altria settlements. This arises from our e-cigarette and vaping litigation and the settlement that we've received from that. So, welcome, Mr. Glendenning. We'll give you a minute to get set up.
Step over there and make sure that cabs for you all see.
All right.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to have this discussion. This opportunity that we have with the funding from two major settlements from Altria and Juul is something that is very exciting for me as a health educator. It's something that I have not had the opportunity to do, and I've been doing this for 12 years. We're going to present baseline items for use of this funding that should touch just about every single student in the school system over the next 7 years. And it is baseline. The funding amounts as we have this discussion are subject to change, subject to initiative information changing and us making moves based on that. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and get into our presentation. So the context and the problem and the solution, those are three items that we're going to focus on during our discussion. I'll give that context, illustrate the problems facing our community, and offer our district response to those problems through the use of the settlement funding. Our district participated in class action lawsuits against Juul and Altria. Juul and Altria are partner companies, Altria being the larger conglomerate that Juul fits under. So the total amount that our district has received net is about $5.86 million. So that is the baseline that we are going to use for our plan today. Just a little bit of table setting for this. Per our former superintendent, Caddy Moore, when the original settlement with Juul was set, it's going to support the efforts to teach students the importance of caring for their own health and making responsible choices, which is my calling. This is what I do as a health educator every day. This is going to allow us to do some things that really focus on an item and a part of our culture that was taken from our youth. We have sought out community input. Our School Health Advisory Council, who many of you have direct input and discussions with, has had the opportunity to give input on this presentation and on this plan. They have seen it a couple of different times, and that consists of all of those bullets there are constituents of our School Health Advisory Council, and they have had the opportunity to give that feedback. And I will continue to bring these items to them and to others as we roll on through the initiative. So a little bit about the problem of vaping, which all of you are aware is a serious issue in our schools. This is national data. 2.8 million of our youth use a tobacco product. And over the last 10 years, e-cigarettes are the most popular tobacco product that our youth use. 9 out of 10 of those youth use flavored e-cigarettes, and 25% of them use them every single day. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as we look at North Carolina data. So now North Carolina data, 40%, according to the Youth Risk Tobacco Survey, of never tobacco users, that's students who hadn't touched it, are of our high school students they're considering using. That's an important piece of information when we're educating students, to know that that is a group that we can give information to before they pick up one, before they have an addiction issue, before these things start to take root in their lives. The other issue is really one about disruption to health and learning. So if you're looking at students, high school and middle school students who have to vape at some point during their day because their addiction is telling them that they must do that, then that creates an inequity in their opportunity to learn. It also creates an inequity in the opportunity for others to learn when we have school administrators, teachers, all staff policing this in our middle and high schools and even in our elementary schools in some cases. So that disruption is an extraordinary piece of what we're dealing with in our schools, and I know everybody in this room is well aware of that. This is Wake County data that further illustrates the disruption. So these are the reported tobacco incidences in Wake County Public Schools across the district from 2016 through last year, 22-23. You can see the items in yellow are vaping incidences, and the items in light blue are other tobacco incidences. You can see the step and the trend that has occurred over time, which is going to be one of our main pieces of information that we use as we implement this. We would expect to see this trend change through our practices. We'll get into those practices now. We're looking at 8 focal points for what we're going to present today. We're looking at a standards-aligned curriculum. We're looking at cessation programming for students and staff, district infrastructure, substance use prevention for students, in-service teacher trainings, elementary, middle, and high school, communications campaign, community support and partnerships to make sure that we are taking care of and having partnerships and able to use our community resources around us to make sure that it's not just a school system issue, but it is a community issue that we are solving because it is a community issue. And lastly, we're going to look for advocacy scholarships for those students who are desperately trying to be a part of this movement and seek out their own health and the health of the students around them. So the first item is standards-aligned curriculum. We'd be looking at implementing that in classrooms in grades 3, 4, and 5, in our healthful living classrooms in middle and high school. We're looking at, when you look at units on this slide, that is the grade levels, so that's grades 3 through 9. Price per unit is based on 100 hours of curriculum writing at $35 an hour, which is kind of a standard in academics for how we would compensate teachers who create curriculum. Now, this curriculum could also be something that we locate and curate from other sources, but this is, like I said, this is a baseline bucket, and the baseline that we're using here for this funding amount would be if we were to find health educators within our district that we were able to put on service agreements and create that curriculum. I'm very confident that we could create something, but if something better is out there, then that bucket could change into a different amount, and it might be labeled differently. Cessation programming and treatment, we're looking at 7 units. The units for that is actually years. So the majority of the items that we are talking about would go from now until 2031, the end of the 30-31 school year. So we're looking to partner with WakeMed, UNC, Duke, Poe Health Center, any of those supports that might have counseling that could be offered directly to students that is going to be able to quell the issue that is put on our counseling and student services departments in each school system, in each school building. So infrastructure, we would be looking at the possibility of adding positions in academics and or counseling and student services centrally. That would, these would be terminating positions, and they would have direct support to schools. So the possibility of having substance use specialists that would be able to put together programming, but also go directly into schools, be assigned schools by region, and go and talk with staff and students directly and serve them in that capacity. Also an academics person, possibly a coordinating teacher, to assist with the work of the curriculum and the other items in the health areas. So the number of units there you see would actually be, it would be 28, the example is 28 years for positions, and the additional year would be if we were able to get people in seats during the last quarter of this school year. I'm not sure if that is going to be something we can do, but it is there in case that is a possibility. Substance use prevention programming and support. So these are resources and materials and possibly partnerships with outside entities that would go beyond the curriculum. So this could be field trips to Poe Health. This could be using items that our medical community might have for our use, for our purchase. This might be contracting people to come into schools and talk. But this would be in addition, this is just a side additional piece that would go hand in hand with our curriculum. Our in-service teacher trainings, so this would be the opportunity to have, we would have 1,275 teacher opportunities to be trained. And the example here is Catch My Breath, which is kind of a universal vaping curriculum. It's not necessarily what we would use, but this would be training for one third grade, one fourth grade, and one fifth grade teacher in every single elementary school, and all of our healthful living teachers in elementary, middle, and high school. And it would also have a reserve of about 289 units to ensure the sustainability as we would train folks, but then as people moved in and out of positions, we would be able to train them so that the initiative cannot lose steam in the event that people are moving in and out of positions. So again, that is one example of a possible training and a dollar amount associated with that. Community support and partnerships. This would be funding for things like the Youth Tobacco Forum, Escape the Vape Week, student clubs, parent information sessions that we might want to host, just the materials and the opportunities and the trainers and people who might be involved in those community sessions. This is a very important piece because this is the opportunity to bring what we are doing in schools, in district offices, directly to the parents so that they have an understanding of what's being taught, but also how to support their students and their children. Communications campaigns, so this would be the opportunity for media campaigns, posters, items necessary to communicate healthy lifestyles that are vape-free. And the final item, the eighth item, is our advocacy scholarships. We would be looking at using this settlement funding to reward students who are advocates in their community, who we have seen those students at board meetings. We have seen those students come to our School Health Advisory Council. So to be able to recognize those students, this example would be a $4,000 scholarship for 10 students every year for the 7 years of this plan. But not only recognize students who are doing the work, but also possibly to motivate some students to do the work and to make sure that their voice is heard. This is a draft timeline of how this rollout would look as we go. We are in 2023-24 now, so we are in the planning stages. We have received some of this funding. At this point, the district has received $2.4 million and expects to receive another $1.8 million before the end of the 2024 calendar year. So we can get started on this work. I just want to have the opportunity to put some of the infrastructure in place prior and receive as much feedback as possible. We have received community feedback, and we are looking to make our way to actually taking these items to actions within the district and making changes that are best for our students. This is just a overview of how the dollars will be split out amongst those 8 groups. Again, in draft format, this is the $5.896 million total, and this is the way that this plan would spend those dollars throughout the 7 years of this plan. It's something to note that I'm talking about a 7-year plan because that's the amount of time that seems appropriate with this amount of money. But when we're talking about curriculum, when we're talking about having students motivated to do this work, we're hoping that this takes root and creates a cultural shift within our students. That's one of the reasons we are starting in 3rd grade. Students are seeing this. Students walk into middle schools and they are exposed to it. We want to make sure that they have the message of what the health impact of this is before they are presented with the opportunity to even put one in their hand. So that's when we talk about a culture shift. We're hoping, again, over the course of 7 years, as our students matriculate through 3rd, 4th, 5th, and all the way through the Healthful Living 1 course in 9th grade, this will touch almost every single student in Wake County schools. And that's something that I'm very passionate about with this plan. I think that it has the opportunity to create a better way for the next few years as we're going, and hopefully on past 2031. We're using a logic model to evaluate. We do have our health Advisory Council survey that we send to principals every year. That's a K-8 survey. We can add additional questions to that survey as a district to ask specific questions about vaping and about this initiative as it's being done in our K-8 schools. We also have our youth risk behavior survey and our youth tobacco surveys, which serve as good points of focus for us as we are going through. And this particular piece of the logic model, again, focuses on those incidences, because I believe the incidences are a reflection of what's going on in the schools. And the 1,200 incidences that occurred last year, those are kids who were caught. Those are kids who had a write-up. So we know that those numbers are actually much higher than that, but we hope to see the trend reduce over time. In summation, this is Dr. Wilson Norman actually helped me with these slides, and one of these pictures ended up being one of my very favorite PE teachers in our district, Cindy Parker, who was she was a Teacher of the Year finalist 2 years ago, and I think that just knowing that we can put an initiative like this in the hands of people like that we can make a difference in the lives of these students. And with that, I'll open to questions and discussion.
All right, thank you, Mr. Glenn Denning. Board member comments, questions? This is wonderful news. I know we've been waiting to hear what you were putting together. I think it's really exciting. In 5 years since I've been here, I know that when we talk about vaping, oftentimes we talk about the things that we are able to do, but for the first time, I think we actually have the resources to put together a program with real measurable impact.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see where this goes. I nearly called you Chair Mahaffey. Ms. Mahaffey.
No, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Glendenning and Mr. Cook, and thanks to all the folks behind you that took the time to work on this and give input. I know this is something that we've been hearing about, as Chair Haggerty said, for many, many years with students, and it was students that prompted us to change our tobacco policy to a nicotine policy for those things. And this multifaceted approach, bringing in, letting parents know what a vape looks like, because not everybody knows still, I think is really important, acknowledging that there are already people like the Poe Center with their community coalitions out there. I do have a question about the cessation programming and treatment. I'm assuming on the student side that would be with parent permission. Yes, yeah.
Yes.
And then on the staff side, my husband was fortunate that his EAP allowed him to do a smoking cessation program years ago. And so is that something that HR has been tapped into to see if that's a possibility with our EAP or potentially?
It's potential, and that will be part of the communications that we're having when we're talking about working with staff, because it's a very important piece of this plan.
Okay.
So this is baseline, and those funds would be in place to make such a reach out through HR, through our counseling student services departments, and outside the district, so yes.
And I think it was, building that starting in grade 3 so kids know before they get started, I think is always great. I remember rolling up pieces of paper in my mom's cigarette box saying, please don't smoke, because we were told in elementary school that smoking is bad. So she eventually quit. I don't think it was because of me. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. Any other board comments or questions? Mr. Swanson.
Thank you so much for this presentation, and like Ms. Mahaffey said, this is very exciting and looking forward to the great things that we can do as a district. But I just wanted to clarify, because I know that, curriculum has now become a buzzword, whether good or bad, however you want to say. So, and I know it was mentioned quite a bit, but I understand our staff, know that our staffs would never bring anything that's going to coincide with federal legislation or state legislation. But just for clarification purposes, the curriculum that is out there would have to align with the state standards, correct?
Yes, that is my job, 100%. So nothing that we roll out of the Healthful Living Office is not aligned with a North Carolina standard. That is when we write curriculum and when we curate curriculum. Number one thing is, does it align with curriculum? Number two is, how do we assess it? And number three is, how do we teach it?
Great. Which I assume, but I just wanted to, have that out there for folks who are listening. And, again, curriculum is a buzzword now, so thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right. Dr. Ng? And then we'll come around.
Thank you so much. This is obviously very important in my eyes because of what I do, and I've seen it firsthand, the impact of vaping and the kind of damage, it does to the body. In addition to, affecting, performance in school and all that. So I really welcome this, and, the kind of going along with the curriculum question, you mentioned that there are some other that have implemented other kind of curriculum, or would you be reviewing some of these other curriculum to see whether they are usable in alignment with our standards?
Yeah, so we can look at Catch My Breath, which is the example that was put there, that has a training that is part of it. There's also a Stanford toolkit. It's an anti-tobacco toolkit that has lessons. They don't, I believe, go back as early as elementary. Okay. So we would be looking at what's available, and we would also be looking at, do we have health professionals in our community that can partner with health educators to create things that fill a gap that we need, that might not be something that is given to us from something that we take off or that we pay for online. So the main thing is that whatever comes out will be aligned with every standard, but it will also be in consideration of where we are, what our students need, and we'll make sure that we have scaffolds and the things that we do as professionals and academics to ensure that everything is meeting needs as far as grade level, age appropriateness, standards, and all of those items. So there might be something really great out there that we can tap into. It might be comprehensive, and there might be something that we can take pieces of, or it might be something that we have to curate ourselves.
Right. And the reason I ask is, reading this and reading the timeline, I feel like if only we could implement it faster. I feel like there's a real great sense of urgency, especially with the younger the grades, the children. in terms of changing their viewpoints on vaping before they even get, the idea or attracted to, being by peer pressure, whatever, that we can kind of nip it in the bud and have the most bang for our bucks, right?
Yeah.
And the cost of implementing this and writing the curriculum versus how can we do it at a way that's fastest and most effective. I trust you guys to kind of weigh that in all that. So.
I'll just add, pending the board's discussion this afternoon, we've got action steps that we're prepared to engage in beginning tomorrow.
Okay.
So we share that same sense of urgency.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Caulfield?
Thank you. Hearing those numbers and reading them last night, it's actually really unsettling. We all know it's bad, but when you actually hear like the numbers and put your kids' faces on that, it's really unsettling. So I agree with the sense of urgency. I did see where that chart shows that it's almost 19 months before we get into the green section. So I'm glad to hear that some of it's starting right away. It's definitely important for our younger kids to learn about this, and so we could be more proactive. I have a question on slide number 12. It says grades 3 to 9. It does not mention high school. Can you tell us about that?
So the reason it says grades 3 through 9 is we'll write a curriculum for the Healthful Living 1 course. And that's usually taken in grade 9. So we don't have an elective that is really aligned to this specific topic other than the Healthful Living 1 course, and all students must take the Healthful Living 1 course as a graduation requirement. So we would write curriculum for that. Now, we might be able to also write curriculum into our fitness electives and other electives. That could be taken, pieced out from what we use in Healthful Living 1, and it will be appropriate to put into those electives. That's the only reason it says through grade 9, because that's the last mandatory Healthful Living course that students have. They must take it K8, but the only must-have is Healthful Living 1 when they get to high school.
So I understand that we have a certain standard that we have to at least meet, right? So my concern is that once these children get to high school, they now have the means. They have the car, the money, the job, and the pressures. So everything that we've taught them as a kid, you're hoping that they didn't miss all of any holes or anything along the way, that when they get to this point that they don't fall into those pressures. But we see that that's not what's happening, especially in this past, 3 years, if not more. And as a matter of fact, in my district, we just lost 2 kids this past weekend, and quite a few affected. So for me, I think that we should kind of step it up in high school. Not that the younger children are not important, because that's where it starts. And I understand that we only have one Healthful Living, and we are on block schedule, so it kind of makes it hard to have it all year, quarterly and monthly, however it needs to happen. But they all have some kind of advisory or some kind of class. Is it something that we can put in that they'll get some kind of life skills kind of thing? And this is something that is repeated to them. I mean, I still remember those commercials. This is your brain on drugs. Like, it's still there. We don't see those commercials anymore. But it was just repetitive over and over again. But I feel like when we get to high school, they kind of don't hear it when they really need to as much.
Yeah. So the focus of the curriculum is really to make sure that we get the kids when we have the kids, and give them everything that we can to create that culture. And then we have the other items. So we have the cessation treatment program and treatment. That would be for students. That would mostly fall in high schools. So that would be a support for kids who are already under that influence. We have the district infrastructure, which would be a push into schools to allow for counseling for those students. We would have the substance use prevention and support. So those are partnerships that we could pull in. Those will be focused mostly in secondary areas and more highly in high schools. So, so those are items. The community support and partnerships. Those are all those items that really would be more focused on the high school kids and the middle school kids as they're going out, as they're being social, those opportunities to go out of the building, the clubs, those things, that's where those other buckets are focused. And the Healthful Living one is part of that, but it's kind of an introduction, and then the supports that are beyond the classroom are there. We can take a look at what other opportunities there are for in-classroom supports, but a lot of those 7 other buckets are really focused very much in that secondary area for the reasons that you stated. So,
Right.
so we'll look at that.
And I appreciate the cessation part of it, but I'd rather fix less.
Yes.
And proactively prevent more.
Yep.
I did have a question on slide 14. Can you explain more what terminating positions are?
So terminating positions are, the funding won't last beyond the 7 years, so those positions would terminate at 2031.
That's kind of what I thought, but I just wanted to make sure because it's 2.9 million is going into that category. It's a big chunk. So what is our plans for when that is not there?
So what we're hoping for is that the positions will have the impact on the culture that we're looking for, and that the sustainability will continue through the curriculum that we've written and through the partnerships that we've made, and that beyond 2031, the initiative doesn't stop. The funding from Altria and Jewel stops, but the initiative itself will not stop. The curriculum will not stop. We'll have curated that. We'll be able to use academics resources in health education to continue that. The primary, the seed piece is there, and then we could just use what we do just to write our standard curriculum to continue to support curriculum and those partnerships. It will make a difference in 2031, but we're hoping that the cultural piece and the shift that we're hoping for will take root through the initiative plan.
Okay, thank you. And I love the scholarship part of it. I think that's absolutely wonderful. I think that is going to be positive and contagious. So, and hopefully it is. And I just have one more question. As far as the funding, obviously we see how much it takes to stretch all of the dollars into what it is that we need. Is any of this going to be community involvement or webpage technology, something that is going to show the community how they can participate, like Dads on Duty, that's been mentioned quite a few times. That's a free program that we can get from our community to keep stretching, funds that we don't have. And just having that presence there, kind of keeps the kids out of the bathroom. They don't have a place to do it. They can't do it. They got to wait. You know what I'm saying? It just makes it a little bit harder. Will we focus on any of that?
Yeah, so that would be the communications campaign and the community support and partnerships. Those would be 2 areas that could focus on items just like the ones that you're describing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, then. So then we'll conclude with the board member who's been working on this the longest, our Vice Chair, Ms. Johnson-Hosler.
Thank you very much. I'm actually going to reach out to NC Child and have them send this to the students who originally came to us nearly 8-9 years ago now, to let them know that we're finally making a lot of headway. Again, they are all young adults now. But for those of you who don't know, their youth advisory initially brought this to us as a concern very early on when they looked like actually thumb drives, and they quite clearly have changed and morphed a lot. And to your point, Ms. Mahaffey, I would imagine that they're actually going to continue to change, because part of the shtick in marketing is to continue to outsmart those of us who are trying to stop it. Again, I also want to echo Ms. Caulfield. I like the idea of the scholarship. I also kind of want to note 2 things I think is important, and mostly not just for my colleagues, but for parents. And I know you all will share this, but much of our work has actually already been set for us. I'm of the age of not just stop smoking, which Ms. Mahaffey knows because she knows my mother, did not stop smoking no matter what I told her. But there's also a significant more amount of research that has shown us that those campaigns actually did not prevent or create cessation. And so I appreciate that you all are going to do your due diligence, and not, as much as we'd like for this to be quickly, that has not served us well to change behavior. This is a behavior change, and it's going to require us to use the CDC, which you all have heard me say has done a great deal of work around what actually works for public health models of actually preventing behaviors, because that's what this is a behavior. And so I appreciate and will still say I completely support doing this work right and well, so that we're not talking about this another generation. Now, to be clear, I believe the way that our industries are created, that there'll be something new, but I think in this case, it behooves us to use the research that actually is proven to create behavioral change, especially for this age group. Lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity. I feel like I'm stealing Miss Edmonds' thunder, because generally she takes this opportunity to say we are doing what we can based on not just state standards, but state rules around when we have access to students to talk about things that are not in our core curriculum content. So Healthful Living is not designed by you, unfortunately. There are rules that you follow, and I do think that you all are using all the tools that you can to meet the needs of our older kids, given your job is still to stay within the state guidelines, which there is no real access point for our students beyond ninth grade to talk about anything outside of core curriculum, contrary to what people say. So thank you for doing your best to acknowledge this, but I also think it's important that we acknowledge that you're working within constraints that are out of your control. And hopefully, part of what we will do is also educate parents and peers who actually have the most influence over their kids in joining in with this with us. So I'm glad we're doing a comms campaign, because I do think those are pieces for me as a parent that are going to be important to reinforce. Because I'd be remiss to say there are parents who actually allow this, and I think it's because they also don't have the correct information around this is just as harmful. And so I do think that that's a whole nother place that we have not actually talked about, is how we use our comms campaign, which of course is steeped and rooted in how public health prevention models, is to actually also engage parents and other adults who are also allowing these behaviors. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Johnson-Hostler. Okay, Ms. Mahaffey.
I just quickly want to reiterate and note that our county commission and several of our town boards have made zoning requirements so that vape stores are located farther away from schools. This doesn't stop them from being at a... I got you, Mr. Swanson. This doesn't prevent them from being sold at a gas station nearby, but certainly those larger school stores that may have the more fun-looking items that have evolved in the past 10 years. So many thanks to those partners that are already doing that kind of work.
Well, as you can tell, this is a subject that all of us on the board are interested in, are passionate about, and committed to. And so I just hope you'll continue to update us on your progress as all of this work goes into place. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. The next item that we have on our work session agenda is also a matter that I know many of us on the board have a lot of interest in. This was an inquiry made to staff about the requirements to pay hourly employees on a monthly basis, and what flexibility we might have to look at other options, either a semi-monthly or a biweekly basis. And I know there were a lot of legislative issues to look into, a lot of policy issues, and so now we have, I'm sorry, I gotta reset. This. We'll have Ms. Posey and Mr. Nieder discuss what some of those challenges are and what options we might have going forward. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chair Haggerty, members of the board, and Superintendent Taylor. If I could ask that the presentation be brought up, please. Great. So this afternoon, we'll present to you an overview of what would be required to transition to paying hourly staff 2 times a month rather than the monthly basis they currently are. And we'll review with you what departments were involved with doing this assessment, review with you what staff are considered hourly versus salaried, give you a sense of what software development and programming would be required, share with you perhaps the biggest issue involving additional time, share with you estimated one-time cost for the programming, as well as ongoing costs to move to this, and go through a couple prerequisites and just share some risk-reward thoughts with you. So a lot of different staff were involved in researching this. I'm not going to actually go through the slide, but as we look at the various functions within administrative services, which includes budget, finance, accounting, purchasing, risk management, treasury, the 4 functional areas of human resources, probably the single most complex function that we perform comes out of our compensation services area, and that is the running of our payroll. The running of our payroll involves not only compensation services, it involves human resources, it involves technology services, communications plays a role, and our treasury function plays a role as well, because we have to do things like order cash, and there's strict guidelines around when we can and cannot order cash and how far in advance we can do it. So again, I'm not going to go through this slide, but you see a lot of different people and departments were involved with this assessment. So exactly who are considered to be true hourly staff? Bus drivers, safety assistants, and school-based child nutrition staff. All of our other classified staff, banded staff, and certified staff are considered to be salaried and not hourly. So these categories, the bus drivers, safety assistants, and school-based child nutrition staff, represent about 6% of our total staff, just to give you a sense of the scope. And to a comment you made, Mr. Haggerty, we did work with staff at Therington Smith. State statute specifically precludes us from paying some of our staff more frequently than the once a month, and the biggest category there are our certified staff. All of our teachers, all of our instructional support, we are precluded from paying them more frequently than monthly. So as far as what would be required, further programming and customization would be required of our Oracle ERP system. Oracle is what really drives our business side engine. Funding would be required for software development, potential unforeseen issues, and working with contractors to do significant amount of testing. Much of this work, and he's not here today, came out of Shashi Staff Technology Services, and their estimate is that 6 to 8 months would be required for the full development and testing. One other party I will mention that was involved in this review was our outside support group that we use to support our Oracle ERP, and that's ST Tech. Another area that would likely require software changes and other work to set the stage for moving to pay hourly staff 2 times a month would be in the area of benefits, and specifically benefits withholding. Amounts are withheld each payroll from employees for health insurance, dental, various other optional benefits that our employees can choose to participate in. And in some ways, the school is really just the middleman, if you will, in that we withhold these amounts from employees, but then we provide those amounts over to the third party providing the benefit. The amounts by these benefit providers are billed to us on a monthly basis, and there are interfaces that send most of these digitally So moving to paying hourly staff twice a month will require effectively withholding 1/2 of the monthly amount from each of 2 paychecks, and then developing systems to reconcile those 2 1/2 amounts into the full amount. There already is reconciliation work we must do when we do things on a monthly basis, and that results from what we would call life cycle events. Employees don't all just start on the first day of the month, and they don't all leave us just on the last day of the month. They come in the middle of the month, so all these things have to be prorated. So moving to pay hourly staff twice a month will increase significantly the amount of time and effort required in the reconciliation process. It can be done. We still not finalized what program will be required in this category, and those costs are not included yet in these estimates I'm sharing. So as far as some of the one-time and recurring costs, estimates are somewhere in the $150,000 range one time for programming with Oracle, $200,000 to $300,000 required for testing to bring contractors on. And as I shared with you on the prior slide, still not sure to be determined what kind of costs there would be associated with making changes to the interfaces to the benefit providers. On the recurring side, we estimate across compensation services, human resources, transportation, and child nutrition services, an additional 8 full-time employees or full-time equivalents. And we have not defined exactly what level they would be, so we went to our classified position. We just took a budget analyst grade. We went to, I think it was step 14 or 15, kind of a mid-career person to cost this out. And based upon our current salary schedules, the cost on a recurring basis would be just under $600,000. And again, there is possibly post-implementation, there could be additional requirements from a staffing standpoint. Getting into a couple prerequisites, and again, this is more on the technology services side. 2 prerequisites. One, and this is already underway and has been for some time, implementing the online time and leave absence management modules. This is something the district purchased a couple years ago, and final testing is underway. We've got a target, Tech Services has a targeted live date of July 1 of this year. Regardless how frequently employees are paid, this will be a big step forward in that schools and other staff will be able to do all of their entry of time and their leave, annual leave, sick leave, et cetera, in an automated manner. But that's going to take some working with structures. Some of our staff do not have access on a daily basis to computers, so we're going to have to work through those things too. We also anticipate, and again, this is from Tech Services, a 3 to 4 month window after the online time and leave absence management goes into place for any issue resolution. The second prerequisite, and this is also underway and has been underway, I'd say, for over a year. Technology Services is working with our support organization as we begin to migrate to the latest Oracle release, and that is release 12.2. It's a significant migration. I believe the last time we migrated to a new release, it's been at least 6, 7, 8 years. So it's a major step. Again, it's already underway, and the targeted live date here is December of this calendar year. And again, with this, and these estimates are from Tech Services, a 4 to 5 month post-live window. In my recollection from the last migration we did, it was perhaps longer than that, but I think the major issues would be worked out within that time frame. So I already mentioned that the 6 to 8 months for the development and testing of the customizations, some of that development work can take place concurrently with the migration to the new Oracle release. That doesn't have to begin after, but again, all the testing would have to take place after the migration is done. So kind of looking at the risk-reward considerations and any other concerns, again, about 6% of the staff are considered true hourly. Granted, the other classified staff, there's nothing in statute that says we couldn't pay them more frequently, but they're not considered hourly. But, so I throw that out there for the board. I'm going to talk about a survey we did with other districts in a minute. To us, there is no indication that increasing the payroll frequency will lead to an increase in recruitment and retention rates, and that's based upon information from other districts for these hourly staff. And these other districts that have gone to a more frequent pay cycle have all supported their significant increase in reconciliation issues. And last, we talked about, we don't even know for a fact if the majority of these hourly staff support this or not. There's anecdotal data from other districts that when they did this, there was pushback afterwards. So there was discussion if this is something we are seriously looking forward with doing, of the potential need to do a survey of staff to make sure it's really something they are asking for. Again, continuing with the risks, there would be an increase in risk to the monthly processing of the main payroll, and to try to give that to you, share that with you in layperson's terms. The payroll is a multi-step process, and at different points, different departments get locked out. So we can't put a new employee on payroll after we've already locked the system down for that payroll. And the current lockout periods and margins of error, when I say margins of error, time to get it done, are already pushing the limits of getting a payroll out successfully, month in, month out, month after month. Moving to twice a month, again, it can be done, would increase the number of lockout periods and squeeze those margins of error of meeting our payrolls in a timely manner even further. I mentioned the survey. We heard back from 90 other.
Mr. Nieder, I'm sorry, can you just explain what a lockout period is and why that is a problem for staff?
It's not a problem for staff, it's actually a control to keep certain work from, new employees are hired. They may not be, let's say I'm hired on the 11th of the month. My first paycheck, let's say I'm a certified staff, will be the following month. We don't want that information from that new employee starting on the 11th of the month to get caught up in the payroll for the month that we're currently processing. So we lock out HR from being able to input that once that lock date, and it's usually around the 10th of each month, goes into place. This was developed, I think, back in 2000 when they initially migrated to the Oracle system. Okay. And then payroll has a multi-step process as well. And once each step is completed, any work, it's a sequential stepwise process. And so when I say the margin of error, each one of these steps sometimes has to be restarted if errors kick out and other things. And our payroll goes out, Trish, it's the end of the month, but it's a Friday if it's If it's going to be a weekend, it's usually it'll go out on a Friday, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the monthly schedule. So we do
Okay.
have, every employee gets paid at the end of the month. If it falls on a holiday, it
Right.
usually will show up earlier. It depends on the person's bank account.
So, back to your question, Ms. Mahaffey. So all these steps have to happen such that on this magical day, the automatic deposits go out. And in addition, we still have employees that receive paper checks. They will not do a direct deposit. Those checks have to then be couriered out to schools on that day as well. So it's a choreography, and there's, when I say margin of error, if something goes wrong,
Right.
we're not going to hit our target of
No.
date and getting
I-
the payroll out on time.
I appreciate you taking the time to explain that.
Yeah.
Having never done payroll myself and only been on the receiving end, I did not know what lockout meant, so thank you.
You're welcome. So for the survey, we heard back from 90 districts. These are all in the state of North Carolina. And of the 90, 80 pay their hourly staff on a monthly basis, as we currently do. 10 of the districts, 10 of the 90, do pay their hourly staff either twice a month or biweekly. The majority of the districts paying more frequently are very small districts across the state. And again, we heard, as I've already shared from the other districts, that their switching to more frequent pay periods has not had impact on their capacity to recruit and retain staff. And they also did confirm that what we anticipate is increased volume of reconciliation issues based on these life cycle changes is real. So that is the high-level overview of requirements that would be necessary to transition to paying hourly staff twice a month. Can it be done? Yes. Are there both one-time and recurring costs associated with going here? Yes. And are there increased risks to the districts successfully running the payroll, the monthly payroll? Yes. Payroll, I'll end with payroll is one of those funny things where if we get everyone's paycheck right, we get an A. If we get one paycheck wrong, or a lot of paychecks wrong, we get an F. There really is no margin of error. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Nieder. I'm sure there are lots of questions. I was going to say, I always tend to start this way. Let's start over here this time. Mr. Swanson, I believe you might have a question or two.
I have more than a couple. So thank you all for getting this to us. And I believe the original motion that I had set forth back in November also required some feedback from staff as well, the hourly employees. And so I have some questions when you mentioned the staff that were involved. I think that was on page 3, slide 3. This seems very similar to when we were having conversations with bus drivers, and bus drivers were not in the conversation. So out of those respondents, did we receive feedback from the 6% of staff that you listed, our bus drivers, our safety assistants, our child nutrition staff, when we were getting this information?
We have not yet done that, Mr. Swanson. As I shared with you during the presentation, one of the things we would do is get feedback from the staff to see if they would support this. We were simply looking at the technical requirements of what would be required.
Right, so I'm assuming there must have been a disconnect in my motion, because it was also, in addition to doing this piece, was to get feedback from staff as well, and that was in November, and here we are in February. So I'm concerned about the amount of time that's went through, and I'm also concerned when I saw on this slide that there was no benefits. It was on slide 10 that said no data indicate that increase to payroll frequency would lead to an increase in recruitment. That's a little offensive when we've heard from staff that are hourly that this is essentially life or death for them when it comes to their checks. And when you are seeing the cost of living increase and that we can't necessarily pay our staff a livable wage, which in this county I believe is about $19 based on some research, that's a problem for me. So I do believe that this does lead to some increase, but again, we may not know that because we have not spoken to our staff. Also, and Chair Hegarty, I have a couple more. If I need to go out of line, please. Thank you. Also, I think we knew prior to this that the systems that we were using were outdated. So we knew that they were going to take amount of time for us to update our system and to get those pieces through. But I also was aware and I knew that principals and teachers were not, there was some cease and desist that required states, districts from paying those employees hourly, those employees twice a month as well. So just a little concerned about this. I also am trying to figure out how Guilford and Durham and New Hanover are not considered small counties. And if they're able to do this, I'm pretty sure that we are, and I'm also prepared, Mr. Chair, to make a motion for us to get this done because we've been talking about this for quite a while, and I think it's time for us to do some action on this. Because again, we are talking about folks who are living essentially paycheck to paycheck. And if this, and I've heard stories from safety assistants that have talked about the challenges that they have faced from not necessarily being able to, waiting to the end of the month because, if we hire someone in August, there's no guarantee that that person is going to get their check August 30th. Is that correct? Because they have to also have essentially some time in the hole with the district before they get a check. Is that accurate?
Mr. Swanson, we put into place earlier this
I just
school
wondered if
year
that was
changes to when bus drivers do receive their first check, as well as when they receive their recruitment and retention bonus. And
So,
it's
Mr.
within
Meader-
a couple weeks, if I recall. And if I could respond to a couple other comments.
Not at the moment, because I still have a couple really quickly. I just think that we have to do better. And I'm pretty positive that there is some consensus on this board that we could move forward on this, just because I'm concerned that those voices are not being heard, and these are folks that are going to be directly impacted. Whether it's going to be a good or bad thing, we don't know because we're not centering their voices. And I think that is a problem. And when we look at our strategic plan, we talk about making sure that all voices, all folks are included, and I would love for those voices to be at the table. And I think moving to a new system does require a lot of money on the front end, but the risk and the rewards are, in my opinion, are worth it at the end. So those are all of my comments at the moment. If I need to jump back in, Mr. Chair, I will.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Going around the table, Ms. Caulfield?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, just to make sure I understand. You said that we have contractors for testing, and it's 6 to 8 months. What exactly do they do?
And again, Shashi, our Chief Technology Officer, it's okay, is not here today. And as it relates to to your question, Ms. Caulfield.
Excuse me, Mr. Nieder, you do have somebody on staff who?
I'm willing to offer if you would like me.
Yeah, that's fine. Look, come on up, but let me finish. The Technology Services Division, and specifically the area and the senior director that oversees the Oracle is not here. They will be in the best position to share with you the time frame as it relates to migration to the new release of Oracle. I don't oversee that. I don't claim to be
Right. I'm just
expert in that.
wondering-
And as far as the testing, after these programming changes are done, we literally will have to run multiple payrolls, mock payrolls, if you will, to ensure the accuracy of it. We don't have staff to do that. We have staff working on payrolls just to get a payroll out each month, so we would contract that out. And the only other thing I would add, when I shared the information about the recruitment and retention results, that was strictly feedback we received from other districts and just shared as information and nothing else.
Yeah, so I kind of agree with Mr. Swanson, that was going to be one of my questions, is out of 90 schools, 80 are paid monthly, and I'm just wondering, are they having retention issues as well? Because it's a nationwide thing. I would find it hard to believe that because they're paying them monthly, everybody's just hunky-dory.
We're not aware of any district in this state that isn't having recruitment and retention issues.
Right, so I'm just wondering, apples to apples, like, who's asking the questions and whose voice is answering that question? Because everything I hear is that these people, the bus drivers, the CNS workers, the teachers, who are counting on those small amount of dollars, because we all know that they're not getting paid a ton of money, that's a lot. When you have to fill your tank to go to work every day, you are waiting paycheck to paycheck, and every single dollar works. If you've got to balance everything out with your family, God forbid your child goes into the hospital or something happens, that puts a glitch in it. You still have to wait a whole nother month for your paycheck. When some of us, may have bigger salaries, we had that cushion. They don't. So I just don't see how teachers would give you pushback if they got paid the same salary, but more often. I understand that it's more technical on our side, but I think it helps them out a great deal in their pocket. Could you explain the state statute part of that? I think I was getting confused with that.
There is, according to the board's attorney, statute that specifically requires that our certified staff be paid monthly.
And Ms. Caulfield, we do have copies of those statutes available, and that was actually a topic that was suggested by one of our other board members for our legislative agenda discussion, and so we can get into more detail in that later without having to ask Mr. Nieder to recite the statute.
I appreciate that. And two more little quick things. It says 8 additional FTE. What is FTE?
Full-time equivalent.
Oh, okay. Equivalent. Okay.
To simplify it, 8 additional staff.
All right. And the Oracle is what we're using now, correct? It would just be an updated version, the 12.2?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you, that's all I had.
Thank you, Ms. Caulfield. Thank you, Ms. Caulfield. Ms. Mahaffey.
Thank you. Mr. Nieder.
I'm sorry,
Oh,
but
I'm sorry.
before you start, we did have staff that came up that
Yes.
thought they might be able to offer something, just so we don't get
No,
too
no, no,
far
no, that's very
from the
important.
question.
Yes, thank you.
Good afternoon, Board. I'm Michael Ramsey. I'm the Senior Director for IT Infrastructure, filling in for Sashi. My group is the one who's responsible for the infrastructure, the servers, bringing them in, not the Oracle side itself, but I can give you an update that we have just received. As soon as we were discussing this, we placed the orders for the servers. They just arrived, and we're getting them in as quickly as we can. Ms. Caulfield, you asked specifically what kind of testing are they doing? Oracle is very intensely complex, and if we don't test every possible scenario, we can be in the news very quickly. So we got to make sure that we know that we know that we know that it's right. Happy to go into more detail when not on public.
Thank you.
I think that was important to know, and thank you for stepping up, Mr. Ramsey. That's very helpful. Mr. Nieder, so the 6% or the approximate 6% of staff is all non-certified staff that we're looking at, or is it just hourly employees, or are they the same?
Hourly employees are the categories on the slide, which include bus drivers, safety assistants, and child nutrition workers. We have additional classified staff that there is no statute that says we can't pay them more frequently than monthly. That could be paid, but we just brought back the requirements associated with paying hourly staff.
Okay.
But additional classified staff, bookkeepers in the front office of a school, other staff, there's no statute that keeps us from paying them more frequently than monthly. And with similar work to what's been described of what would be required to pay the hourly employees, the same programming would allow other categories to be paid more frequently.
Okay. And just off the top of your head, do you know approximately what percentage of our staff, I believe we have around 22,000 employees, would be you don't have to pull out the hourly staff, but if it were all classified staff?
I would really want to look at a number before I even threw an estimate out. We can certainly bring that back for you, though.
Okay. And then, Chair Haggerty, if I may, we may not be able to have the voices of our bus drivers here right now, but we do have someone who works with many of our bus drivers and classified staff. So I know it's a little unorthodox, but if we could invite Ms. Wells, who's in the audience, to tell us what she's hearing from the folks. I'm going to leave that to you, though, on whether that's possible, so that she can share what she's hearing from.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. We won't invite her at this moment of the presentation, but at the end of the presentation, it would be appropriate, I think, in the work session to get that comment.
All right, thank you.
All right, then. All right, Mr. Hershey, are you ready?
Oh, yes.
All right.
The first item, and this is, I think, a charge that would have to be from our superintendent, as we get presentations, and this is not a reflection of you, but this just happens to come up, we talk about being a national leader. We often get comparisons to what's going on in the state, and we do not get comparisons as to what the largest districts in the nation are doing. If we are going to be, if that's the goal, from the superintendent down, then I would like staff, I would appreciate it, but I'm not going to direct it as a board member, that we hear comparisons to the big districts in the country. Because I do believe that some of them do biweekly. I could be wrong. I thought Fairfax County did, which is large. I believe it's a little bit larger than we are. Maybe Montgomery County. Anyways, I could be wrong about that. I welcome staff to provide that information to us. A couple of questions. Would we be doing, since we're going to be upgrading the Oracle, are we going to be doing testing no matter what, or is that an ongoing process?
Yes and yes. Just simply taking the existing instance, and Oracle is highly customized, particularly in the area of payroll and HR. Even if we were not looking at changing the frequency of payroll, all these functions will need to be tested. Every function in payroll, accounts payable, purchasing, to make sure that the customizations that are on old release are properly brought over and running accurately on the new release. And then above and beyond that, there would be further new customizations to allow the more frequent payroll, and that would also have to be tested.
Okay. Can you explain why 8 additional staff based on, can you just explain why that is to me?
Increasing the frequency of the number of transactions will require additional time to do the reconciliation work. You're doubling if we were to do it for all classified staff.
But, okay, so for clarification, if they're doing less work for reconciliation in a pay period, aren't they saving time on one end? Because you're doing reconciliation for the entire month, whether you're doing it.
We're doing it twice now instead of once.
Yeah, but you're doing it for less days, aren't you?
It's not the number of days, it's the process of reconciliation.
So can you
doing it for a fewer number of days does not reduce the amount of time it takes.
Explain that process then? I don't understand it, so I just want to make sure that.
What I'd like to do is be able to come back to you with a concrete example.
Okay, that would be fantastic. Just because I don't understand it, and I know we have to vote on a lot of things, and that will make me more knowledgeable. I think the last thing for me is that not everything we're going to do is necessarily about recruitment or retention, which I understand is a big part and respect, but again, if we are going to talk about ourselves as being the model in North Carolina, across the country, then I think it's imperative that we actually lead with actions and not just with our words. So for me, I understand it's a cost. I know money is, not something we can just give out here and there, but I wholeheartedly support us moving in this direction. I personally, let me ask one other thing. You said, or it suggested that it would significantly increase risk if we did it before the full transition to the Oracle 12.2. If we go forward, would staff recommend, whether technology or otherwise, that we time it with the full implementation of 12.2?
I believe the recommendation from technology was to work on the customization of software concurrent with the migration to 12.2, but then not implement the actual new customizations that allow us to do a more frequent payroll until after 12.2 is up and running.
Because it could significantly increase district payroll.
Every time you're doing something new with software, something generally breaks.
I don't have a problem kind of doing it based on what is recommended, as you go to make a motion. If technology believes it's best at a certain point, then I don't have any problem supporting that aspect of it. That's it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Hershey. So what I'd like to do, does anyone else have another comment? Oh, Vice Chair Johnson-Hoslet.
Sorry about that, Chair Hagerty. I think my colleagues have said enough, and thank you, Ms. Mahaffey, for asking, and Mr. Hershey for asking the question about kind of all of our employees that are hourly, because I do believe a couple school districts did do it in waves, like Guilford, started with custodian and others, and then brought on bus drivers and safety assistants. Clearly, Guilford is a county we keep referring to because they have a 20-year history, so we know this is possible to do. And I guess, so for me, I would say I'm willing to take the risk and the financial implications that you've articulated very well for even if it's only 6%. But given we're talking about a much longer window to figure this out, it gives us a great time to do what the initial request was, is to ask those other hourly employees if they want to be a part of this, which I think, to your point, this is not your point, but it would be a larger percentage that I would imagine from your perspective would be more cost effective. But ultimately, I don't think I have to tell you, you definitely hear from at least 5 of us who are at a place where it's really difficult to keep talking about this when we hear very clearly from our employees the direct impact. Even if they're staying with us, it is hard personally for me to listen to and watch people struggle to make decisions around gas to go to work or necessary things for their food. And again, we have a lot of nonprofits that our employees are working with to seek basic needs in their homes. And again, I think Ms. Caulfield said this, some of us absolutely have a cushion, some less than others, but some have none. You all know, I grew up with a single parent who got paid every week. We couldn't have survived if she would have had to wait to the end of the month to take care of me as a single parent. So, and I wasn't even the adult, but I understood the implications of living paycheck to paycheck and still feel that. And so, again, I hear you, and it is your job, and you've done a great job articulating the impact and cost to us. But I can only speak for myself that the cost is worth the reward to those employees who, one, are living in dire straits, and I don't see inflation going down, and I certainly don't see us raising their salaries to meet the needs that are necessary for families to live in a way that we all think is fair and equitable. So, again, I appreciate what you're saying, but I, as a board member, probably disagree with the recommendation you're making, which is I think it's worth the board doing that, and I do fully understand the cost implications and time implications. And I certainly appreciate you running every scenario to keep us out of trouble. I do think that's important. I'm sad to hear it will take us that long, but again, we do this so that we're articulating publicly so we can share this link with our employees as to why it may take that long, because as you can imagine, as the folks who are being responsive to them, it feels like we're dragging our feet to them when we've said to them we're going to ask our staff to do that. And multiple of us have said that we're committed to it. So what you hear is a little bit of oh my goodness, we've been talking about this for a long time, and it feels like Monica, it feels like I'm letting people down for something we said we would move last year, and we're now saying it could potentially be January of '25. And again, I respect the process and appreciate it, but also think it's important to give voice to, as one elected official, of what it means to say to our employees what I believe is possible and important.
Thank you, Vice Chair Johnson-Hustler. Mr. Nieder, you'd indicated that you wanted a response.
Maybe more of a global statement. I want to be clear that this presentation was not made as a recommendation of any type by staff. It was simply to bring information back about what would be required to migrate to paying the hourly employees more frequently, nothing more.
Okay. Well, Mr. Nieder, if I may, I understand and respect that the financial process, and particularly process of payroll and benefits, is very specialized. And to people outside of that work, it can seem arcane at times. And I think that oftentimes people don't know or appreciate everything that goes into, for example, the reconciliation process and how much care and attention is required. And it can be difficult, too, when we see employers like McDonald's and KFC promising to pay employees within 24 hours of their work by mobile app. You know, and we see this in the new economy, and we see this as we struggle for workers, and without knowing everything that the schools process entails, it's clear that there's going to be questions. And so I think we can, in many areas, rely on your expertise and your knowledge of what will be required to be necessary, what would be necessary if we wanted to make this change. But what I would like to say as well is, while I'm not an expert in the field of finance and nor accounting, I do know a little bit about argumentation. And when you tell us that this presentation was not a recommendation, it's hard for me to accept that based on how some of the information was presented. And I think if you listened really to the comments that came from board members around this table, I hope that you would hear why I'm saying that. And if not, I want to uplift a few things just to be clear. So when you say, and you've made this point a couple of times, that there's no evidence that staff wants this, but then to Mr. Swanson's point, there wasn't a formal survey or communication with the hourly staff who had been advocating to board members about this for months. It sort of seems like, you know, you're dismissive of the proposal that you're providing. You're stating, well, there's no evidence that staff even wants this or would make a difference in retention or recruiting. Is sort of a conclusory statement, sort of a judgmental statement, like a statement you would provide in a recommendation. But I think you're hearing questioning of that statement if there wasn't more effort to get that staff input to help answer that question about whether or not this was something that staff wanted. And again, I know that in our roles, we hear from some people, sometimes those people, we hear the squeaky wheel gets the grease, or the squeaky, you know the expression. It might well be that after surveying the majority of staff, maybe this isn't something that the hourly staff wanted. But I think without making that effort, it's dismissive to come in and then give a conclusory statement that, well, we don't even know that staff wants this. will be that you don't know because it wasn't asked or it wasn't collected. And so I think putting a statement like that in the presentation seems to indicate some bias. Further, when you make statements, well, there's no impact, there's no evidence that this has had any impact on hiring or retention. If only 10 districts in North Carolina have done this, and some of them did this 20 years ago, how would one measure the impact of whether a change to this would really have an effect on hiring and retention? I don't think you can look at something that took place in 2002 and say whether or not it would have, with any certainty, any kind of impact on retention or hiring today. And so I think that was a little bit dismissive. To Mr. Hershey's points, and I think these are valid points, we've been hearing for years about Oracle migration and the improvements that are going to be necessary to update our system. And these are going to be expensive. This will be an important investment that our district will make. And I can understand and believe, and I think it's a very valid point, that perhaps the system as it's configured now may not be able to process payroll in this way that's being requested. But will the changes necessary for that kind of payroll processing, are the costs that you brought forward only the costs we would face if we weren't going to make any changes anyway? Or is this, I think, as what Mr. Hershey was alluding to, something that if we're going to have a continued improvement and a continued migration to more advanced features, would this be something that we're going to be making investments in the Oracle system anyway? We're going to have improvements in this anyway. And wouldn't some of these costs that you're attributing to this proposal also be costs we might be incurring anyway? I mean, I know any large software system we'd probably amortize that over time. So I don't see that those one-time costs as much of a big burden. But, and the question Ms. Mahaffey had raised about, this proposal only looked at our hourly staff. And I know that bus drivers and those that are paid hourly were, I think, the principal concern of the board. But when we talked about this in work session, we were, and I think you may have been clear too, the distinctions between classified staff and our teachers, right? And there was talk about how we fill a lot of these positions, that we're not comparing what we do in Wake County with a system this large to some of the smaller districts in the state may not be the apples and apples comparison that we need. The workforce, the labor market that we see in Wake County as we struggle to fill these jobs is going to be different than what we might see in Gates County or Hope County or Cherokee County or even Guilford County. And so being able to look and see how similarly sized districts in similar markets are paying their employees may be of more use to us. And so I bring this up not as any sort of, rebuke or criticism, but rather just to help, if it hasn't landed, I just want you to understand why there was a perception that this was a recommendation rather than just a presentation that was responsive to what I think some of the board members were asking or looking for. And I feel confident that with this direction, you might be able to go back, assess, and maybe provide some more answers that I think the board has a very sincere interest in looking at and looking for. Again, I know and I appreciate that a lot of work went into this, but I just wanted to make sure, and please, board members, let me know if I failed to capture something. I just wanted to make it clear, based on the input that I heard, really what the board would like to hear to guide our decision-making process going forward. Thank you.
Could I
So, Mr. Chair, I'll respond. I do want to say that the administration's job was to bring back to the board the possibility of what it would take in order to do biweekly pay for hourly employees. And so if the intent of the board is to move forward, we absolutely have no problem with that. The only thing that I would say is we would definitely want to be able to give to the board the time frame of proper implementation, where you do have to go through the testing and all of those things that are necessary. The one thing I know that Ms. Anita said is that if you get this wrong, it could end up in a very bad situation, and we've seen that. One of the things I can definitely do is reach out to the large district consortium that we are a part of, and this is districts from all over the nation, and ultimately every state has different requirements, and so there will probably be some that do it and some that don't for various reasons, so we can collect that information. The other thing that we can do is to be able to bring back survey information from all staff that would qualify for biweekly pay, that are not the certified staff that are under the general statute restrictions. And I'm certain that we can do that by the second meeting in March and be able to bring that information back. So I want to say to the board that if the intent is to do this, administration has no problem with it. Well, I won't say whether administration has a problem with it or not, but we are absolutely here to do the work of the board that you direct us to do. And I will say that the information that they've received back in terms of what has happened in other districts, I mean, I have to say that's valid information, but it has absolutely no impact on how we do it. And so I just want to make that clear that, you know, our goal is to do what's best for our employees. We will certainly make sure we hear from them what their thoughts are about this. I would imagine they would probably be for it. Now, you know, they may regret that 2 weeks down the line, but that's not the board's fault. They will ask you for something, and you will be able to provide that, and that's your responsibility. So I just wanted to share that, but I think you had a question. Well, Mr. Chair.
I appreciate that. I think there were, I do see a couple of hands, but Mr. Swanson, I'll turn to you.
Thank you for sharing those words, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. And I think just for me, I'm prepared to make a decision, whether it's today, the second meeting, because we've heard a lot about this from all staff that we've spoken to, and I think it would be tone deaf if we continue to push this down the road. And so I'm happy to hear what's going to come back on that second meeting in March, but I would also be prepared to make a motion that we move forward in this direction to make this happen, because it's similar to with the master's pay, when we had an outcry of teachers and social workers that were talking about the lack of pay. Action happened immediately. When we're having an outcry of hourly employees, of bus drivers, safety assistants coming before the budget cycle, and we can roll the tape back and hear from the previous cycles, that action has not necessarily taken place yet. And so I think as a district, we're seeing, you know, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. We saw that with bus drivers. We saw that with mechanic staff when they were constantly getting bus increases, but yet we haven't seen anything with that. So I just think for me, it's a sense of urgency. And I'm one vote. I'm elected, and if this is something that does not necessarily go well, I'm happy to take that hit. I'm happy to explain my why. But I just think that there has to be some action. So I'm hoping that we can bring that before, and whoever's in executive for that time, we can go on and make sure that's also a part of the action item on that that second meeting in March.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Ms. Edmonds has had her hand up for a while.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick things. So Superintendent Taylor, with that survey, can we please be a little more intentional and aggressive with getting a good amount of response? Because our response rates to surveys are not always what we'd like to see. So I just make that, I don't know what that looks like, but if we could be really, really intentional to get, you know, a substantive amount of feedback. Anecdotally, I will share that my husband was on a monthly pay rate for about 10 years. higher than what these people are getting paid. Not through the roof, we're I'd say an average middle-income family, but it literally took years to adjust to it. It was really hard. We were not in dire straits, but it was a challenge. I can only imagine what some of our staff are experiencing because anyway. And then I would still like to hear from the representative here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Edmonds. Ms. Caulfield?
So I just want to, one of the struggles I hear with all of our challenges from people, our constituents, our teachers, is that we take so long to do things. And sometimes it is required, like you said, 4 to 6 months is something we want to make sure that we are following the procedure to get it right the first time. But in this situation, I feel like time has passed. We've been presented with information. I mean, we know when we switch over to programs or even updates, even on our phone, it takes you a little minute to get used to it. So we know all of that's going to happen. This sounds like the entire presentation today, it felt like, this is no reflection on the information you gave us. This is information we needed to hear. But it seems like it's more technical on our part versus the reward that it will give for our staff. Now, we don't have the survey, so we can't reflect on that, but we have heard from them time and again. We've had people come up and talk to us in front of the board, and we've had people email us, as a whole, and I'm sure individually, because I've received them, I'm sure you have. So I feel like I don't know why we need to wait until March. Why can't we just go ahead with it now? We all seem to be on the same page with approving this for our staff, and I feel like when you talk about the risks outweighing the reward kind of thing, I think this reward is worth it for our staff. It's something they've been asking for. It may be uncomfortable for us, and it's going to cost. It would have cost if we started out this way. But I don't know if I need to second a motion or make a motion. I would like for us to move forward with it. I don't think that we need to wait longer.
Okay, well, Ms. Caulfield, we are in work session, so we would have to bring something to the board meeting and put it on action for that vote. But let's hear just from a few other board members first, and then if we want to come back to that discussion, we will. Okay. Mr. Hershey.
Yeah, I would like to see it on action tonight. I would like to second when Mr. Swanson makes the motion, because I'd like him to make it. That's just me. But we talk about like the what ifs, it could go wrong. The thing is, like, I really trust staff, and I trust the finance department, and I think they're not going to, as we think about it, I'm not worried that something's going to go wrong because we have excellent staff in place, and we're not going to, we'll get everything in order, however long it takes, and then when we go, it will be right. So I don't have any worries about, I think we have excellent staff. I don't think that's a good, so I'm not worried about mistakes happening. You guys are great. So I'm prepared as well, yes, all around. So I'm not worried about that. I don't think we have to put a go date on a motion and act, so I would like to see us move forward with this tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Hershey. Dr. Ray.
I've been hearing about it, and I've read this before, and I've got some experience myself. When my daughter was young, I had to hire somebody to help take care of my daughter, and doing payroll is not fun. And I know that the labor intensiveness of doing payroll, and so I can certainly understand the increased need for full-time employees to help with that process, and the transition, to this going to biweekly. I think, as Mr. Hershey mentioned, we can be a role model for others in the state in terms of implementing it. And I'm curious even to, in terms of surveying other districts, whether they are having the same discussion and whether they are wanting to have a solution too, whether there is some kind of a collaboration with other districts in terms of finding some ways of doing this in in a cost-effective way. I'm just kind of brainstorming, but certainly, if there's enough of a need for it statewide, I mean, it's something that we need to ponder. And then also looking at, in our legislative agenda, what to do about that, for the other staff as well, so.
Thank you, Dr. Eng. Ms. Mahaffey?
Thank you. And I echo my colleagues. I fully support the implementation on this, given the anecdotal evidence. I appreciate the work that Finance and IT did to give that timeline of 6 to 8 months. So 8 months would put us around October, which is a strange time to be changing payroll. And so I'm curious if the intended motion would be for October, or if that would be at the end of the year to start on January 1. Because I do know, I'm just curious, and as to what that would look like, and I'm sure more time is more helpful.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. Mr. Nieder, you had a...
Yeah, a couple things as far as the timing, and to Ms. Mahaffey's point. I would really like our Chief Technology Officer to have the opportunity to weigh in, because the timing is mostly driven by IT, not finance. There's nothing from a taxing standpoint or an accounting standpoint that says this has to be done at the beginning of the calendar year or the beginning of the fiscal year. The timing, in my mind, the biggest driver of the timing relates back to the Oracle migration to the new release, and that's an IT-centric process. Finance has to be part of testing, but it's really a tech thing. So I would just share that. And just a clarifying point, Mr. Haggerty, you had, I think, a question about costs. The cost to actually migrate to the new release of Oracle is built into the contract. When we extended the contract, when Tech Services extended or put it out to bid, the Oracle support contract, part of that bid was support, and part of that bid request was cost to migrate us to the new release. So that's already covered. The cost to migrate to the new release is already covered in our monthly support contract. The costs you saw today are just the further customizations to allow us to go to twice a month. And then one last comment about what now, hindsight, appears to be a very poorly bullet on a slide. Staff does realize and did realize the need to get information, and to your point, Mr. Swanson, staff survey. It was discussed. Lisa Luton and her team were involved in these conversations. If I'm not mistaken, Lisa, we even drafted a survey, did we not?
Yeah, Mark and I are dusting it off.
Yeah, I mean, so that work was recognized. I'm not sure the slide brought that out, but that was understood, and I apologize that wasn't clear.
Thank you, Mr. Nieder. I do want to recognize a couple of points. I think we've heard from several board members, maybe a majority, that they do want to move forward with this issue, and that the question is not so much a if we do this, but rather how we would do this. I do want to defer to Dr. Taylor and his proposal, because I do think we do need to be aware and sensitive that there are a lot of questions about how we do it and the ability to make sure that we do it the right way so that we don't see problems like we have seen in some other districts. I was saving this debate for our legislative agenda, but if it sounds like I'm going to have to pull this out now, which is that Ms. Mahaffey had suggested that this issue come to our legislative agenda. It had not formally been on there. And if there were any changes that we would need to make to state law, that we would have to request them through the legislature. And, you know, this proposal has looked only at our classified staff. And we know that there are more restrictions, as Mr. Nieder and staff had said, on when we're allowed to pay teachers. What I found as I looked at some of the statutory restrictions, some of the state law governing pay, was that General Statute 115C316, staff and, salary and vacation, talks about salaries. And, you know, excluding our teachers, excluding other employees, it does say that salary payments to employees other than the teachers and certain other things shall be made at a time determined by each local board of education. However, it goes on to say, school employees employed for a term of 10 calendar months or 11 calendar months in year-round schools shall be paid in 12 equal installments. And so I haven't run this past our attorneys or our legislative counsel, but it looks like there is a statutory prohibition, at least in regard to employees at year-round schools, that we might have to overcome. Now, there might be other ways around this. There might be situations where, you know, if drivers are doing routes to multiple schools, then maybe they don't fall under this definition. But we do have some obstacles that I think we at least need to research and be clear on before bringing it to action tonight. But I think the will of the body is very clear that this board wants to move forward with this as soon as possible. But I did want to bring this up as just an example of there may be some other impediments in the way that before we take definitive action on it, we just need to clear. Mr. Swanson.
Thank you for that, Chair Haggerty. And I knew if I didn't look at the statute, you probably had them. That good Central Law School degree has come in handy. That's what we Eagles, that's what we do. So I will compromise, because that's how good government works. So you have to compromise. But I will say very clearly that after I'm okay with getting that research, putting it there. However, at that second meeting in March, I would prefer, however harshly I need to say this, to see this on an action item for that meeting. No more excuses. I think we've had enough lack of action on this. So if our attorneys need to look onto that, I'm fine with that. But that March, it's not March 5th, but that following meeting, I would love to see that on an action item.
And so, Mr. Swanson, I'm looking over to Dr. Taylor just to make sure that he heard you and that this is something that, so that would be March 19th, that we would be prepared to have an action item for the board's consideration addressing this topic. All right.
That is correct, and I mean, again, we appreciate the board delaying the motion, but it really doesn't matter when you do it. I think Chair Haggerty has said it best, that we have to look into the statute and make sure that we do everything according to that. What I can tell you is that at the state level, they've pushed back against the teacher pay because it is a very convoluted process that involves something for them as well. And that's why they've restricted districts from doing it. But the statute clearly says that with others you can do that. And so we'll have to make sure that any inconsistencies with year-round schools, that we attune to that as well. I do like the idea of an extended period, because I do know that consistently has been the October time frame when the General Assembly has passed the budget. We have to do the back pay that covers several months from July up until that point. So that creates problems and havoc as well. But what we can tell you is that whenever the board makes the motion, our duty will be to go back and determine what is the best timeline for implementation, not something that we will stretch out, but something that we will do so that we can do it efficiently and effectively, and we don't have problems with it, but we'll be committed to that.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. And ended also, I think with the timing, it's very appropriate to bring this up and have this discussion as we've had it today, because as staff puts together our budget recommendation, if there are budget considerations that need to be made, it's best for us to know about those on the front end. If it is adding new employees, if it is, changing the pace or the schedule for some of the upgrade issues with the payroll system, it's best for us to know this now and know what we need to do going forward. All right, I do want to bring debate on this to a close. I know Mr. Hershey has his hand up. Mr. Nieder, I would let you close, and then we would like to hear from our member in the audience.
To clarify, because I'm almost would rather not wait for a general motion, but is this going to delay work being done for a month? Or is some of the work going to get started in the meantime?
I mean, I would say that it would. I mean, if I think I clearly understand the intent of the board, and so that means that now our job will be to begin a timeline to move towards this.
Okay.
Part of that work would be surveying those additional employees, and if the intent of the board is to also look at that, then that would definitely make some changes in terms of what would be required. But I think the bulk of it is probably already in front of us. The idea is that once you go to a biweekly pay for employees, you're essentially creating 3 different payroll periods. Pay for the monthly employees and the twice of the month for the 2 times a month employees. And so I think the bulk of it will be there. It will just be identifying what additional work would be needed if we were to include all classified employees versus a small group. But we'll make sure we address that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hershey. Mr. Nieder.
Address this, but I'd like to get clarity if the board is directing that we look at moving to twice a month, and I'll say specifically twice a month and not bi-weekly. Those are 2 different things. But to twice a month for our hourly staff or for all classified staff? And that's a question, I guess.
So I'll just look to the board for what they would prefer. Are we looking at just hourly staff or all classified staff?
I think anyone that's permissible under state statute.
Is that? All right. All right, then. Well, at this point, I'm sorry, Mr. Malone.
I was just going to say, I'll need to talk to Melissa about this. She's been working on this with HR. She had highlighted in the email to me the year-round school issue, and I'm just not sure how that got resolved. But otherwise, the answer is pretty much classified staff. So, but I'm just not sure what her ultimate resolution of that particular piece was, but we'll work with staff on that.
Thank you, Mr. Malone. And thank you for the validation on that year-round issue. If you had said the opposite, I would have been very, very embarrassed. I do appreciate that. Thank you. All right. We will thank you all for the presentation. Before we go on to our next agenda item, we would like to hear from Rachel Wells, if you would like to identify yourself, any affiliation, and then share the comments as requested by the board just on this issue of pay.
My name's Rachel Wells. I'm a representative of the Teamsters Union. I've been working with bus drivers, safety assistants, cafeteria workers, custodians in the state of North Carolina since 2003. I've talked to folks in many different school districts, including here in Wake County Schools. I'll speak specifically about bus drivers and safety assistants in Wake County Schools. I personally have not talked to any school nutrition service employees, but what I have routinely heard from bus drivers and safety assistants in Wake County Schools is that they would like their payroll to be changed from monthly to more frequently. I The school years kind of go together for me, but I think I've had these dialogues now with the administration for at least 6 school years, maybe longer, about making that change. And what I routinely hear from folks is that, and I actually just talked to folks about that this morning and yesterday, was that for 12-month employees, which are bus drivers, you have 12-month bus drivers that drive year-round. A lot of them have been here some time. They've adjusted to being paid monthly. They've, adjusted to that. They're, kind of used to that. It took them a long time to get used to that. It's really a financial hardship for traditional employees, 10-month employees, who go out of school in June. They might get a little summer work, and then they come back in August, and they have to wait until the end of October to receive a full paycheck, because they're paid from, they get a little paycheck at the end of September for that time that they worked in August, and then their September 1st to September 30th time does not get paid until October 31st. So that's a really long time for folks to go, and so that's a financial hardship for them. Also, if there's payroll errors, and you get your paycheck and you're short, then you have to wait even longer for that to be corrected. Now, I know that there's miscellaneous checks that be cut. Typically, miscellaneous checks are cut mid-month. So that causes a delay as well. So I think that what you'll hear is that folks would like to see this change. You're going to have some people that have gotten used to it and, have adjusted to it. What I have routinely heard as well, and I heard this again just yesterday talking to a team lead from the Gardner district, is that new employees, new bus drivers, they get hired, when they find out how long they have to wait are leaving. They're getting another job. I mean, even though the district has made some move to try to get them a check or pay a bonus ahead of time, it's just, folks are just not going to be able to make it work. And I routinely hear that, it's just too hard for them to make it work. I will say that whenever you make a change for anything, you're going to have some people like it and some people that don't like it. I worked with members in getting changes that took place in Durham Public Schools for bus drivers and monitors, and we worked to do that. Was there some fight back after that change took place? Yes, there was. There were some people that were recognizing, right, you get half the amount, right, when you get paid twice a month. So there was some budgetary issues that folks had to work through, but they got through it and, they moved forward. In Guilford County Schools, I would just suggest that maybe you talk further with Guilford County Schools. I know that cafeteria workers and custodians for well over 20 years, when I started working in that district, were paid twice a month. They were paid in the middle of the month, the end of the month. We continue to advocate. That was the thing. When I started working with folks here, I heard over and over and over again, we need to be paid more than once a month. And so we advocated for that for bus drivers, and then it was like the timekeeping system, and, and so they started to get it automated, and they moved to that. It was a slow process, but they did put that in place in 2017 for bus drivers and safety assistants. And then now, I think it's been about 2 years, they put it in place, biweekly pay for all their classified staff. So that's a district that kind of did it in some increments that maybe, and they're using the time and record-keeping system that you guys, attendance, you've been talking about. So anyways, that's my feedback to you all. I think that it was a good move for employees, and I appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Ms. Wells, I really want to thank you. I know that when you were attending today, you had no idea that you might be sitting up at the table behind the microphone, but I think everyone here has heard your remarks. We really appreciate your feedback and representing your members. Thank you. All right, we will now move into our next agenda item on the work session, and this is going back to our 2024 board legislative priorities. As you know, we're in the process of developing our legislative agenda. At our last meeting, we had some really good conversation. We had some ideas that were discussed. fleshed out. I did want to go back. Some of you have contacted me individually just to follow up on one or two issues. I wanted to go through our 2023 agenda, just sort of recap where we were, and then revisit some of the items, new items that were discussed, and see what the will of the body is. We're not taking a vote on this today. We will have additional work on these items at our board retreat coming up this Friday, but this is a chance to do a little bit more development and get a little more clarity on where we'd like to go. So I believe everybody should have a copy of our legislative agenda from 2023. It should be loaded in Assembly, and it's something that was available at our last meeting as well. What I'd like to do first is go through the items that are on here now, just reconfirm everyone's interest, and then, if we could, go into the items that came out of the last meeting or that members have brought me individually. Sound like a plan? All right. So if we looked at last year's agenda, we started off, we divided a lot of our issues into 4 areas: high-quality workforce, student well-being, student outcomes, and legislative support. The first item was improve recruitment and retention by funding competitive salaries for all employees and removing salary compression, reinstating advanced degree pay, restoring longevity pay, expanding current benefits, and restoring retiree health coverage for employees hired after January 1st, 2021. From my notes, we did not have any amendments or changes or updates to that from last time. I want to make sure that that is consistent, and if it is, then we will put a check mark next to it and move on to the next one. All right. Next, we had fund full-time permanent substitute teachers. I know this is something that, we've looked at pursuing in our upcoming budget. I think we've gotten rave reviews from all of our schools about the added benefits of having another adult in the building, providing teachers with that just vital coverage when necessary. Was there any comment, addition, update to that language? All right, we will put a check mark beside that. Go ahead, Ms. Caulfield.
I know that in one of the presentations, we were talking with the grant, and they had added information about that they were going to give professional development to the substitutes. Is that something that we can put in here so that we wouldn't have to count on a grant and that all schools could have it?
Let's see.
Is this not a place to add it? I feel like, the substitutes are pretty important.
I think this is specific just to the full-time sub in the building.
Okay.
But I think that point may be under professional development.
Okay.
And funding those needs could be over here when we see increased investments in our support professionals, maybe expanding it to that professional development to all substitutes, not just the building substitute would be.
I just mentioned because sometimes I think they're kind of that, in parentheses, they're not actually specifically stated.
Okay, thank you. The last item under that one, fully restore the Teaching Fellows Program. Does this remain a priority, Mr. Swanson?
I just checked. I know that the I think is yes and. I know it is currently being offered at Elon University, Fayetteville State, Meredith College, the great North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, North Carolina State, UNC Chapel Hill, UNC Charlotte, and Pembroke. So I'm wondering if we could say expand to the other universities that are here in the UNC school system.
I think that's a great point. I know we'd used fully restore, but without really knowing what restore meant, to what level, to the original level when it was created, to where it had been prior to funding cuts. So would you have a specific language suggestion, or you just want to capture the idea of expansion in the description?
Right. I'm wondering if we list, saying that the program it's at these institutions. However, I'm sorry?
Because we added 2 more schools.
Right.
We added application.
So if we could just say expand to the right, whatever the number of the universities are in our UNC school system. And maybe there's a way that we could also find, advocate that it's also included at the community colleges, because we have a great partnership with Wake Tech. So I don't have the language at this moment, but that's just some ideas that we can flesh out on Friday.
Well, yeah, because I think we can put a very positive spin on this to give credit where it has been expanded. How about continued expansion of the Teaching Fellows Program? And so that recognizes that it has expanded, but that there's still work to do. Thank you.
So, Mr. Swanson, I would add to that, you can not only look at expanding to the state universities, but there are also private universities that have approved schools of education. So that's some of the language you might want to consider as well. Okay.
Yeah. All right, Ms. Edmonds.
Yeah, I was going to mention, I don't often mention bright spots from the state leadership, but I did see the news this week that Appalachian State and ECU got added back in. So that is a victory and something we want to celebrate. So I think continue to expand is great language. And again, we can talk about that on Friday, but that doesn't limit it. If we just say continue to expand, it's very broad.
Thank you, Ms. Edmonds. Dr. Ng?
Just off the top of my head, I mean, is there any role to include lateral entry in the workforce, to help improve that channel?
To actually expand the funding to those teachers who might be working for us.
And I do think that would fall under the high-quality workforce item there. I'm going to just call it expansion of lateral entry opportunities, but if you would like to maybe develop that language a little bit more and can send it to me before Friday, we'll have it for the retreat. Mr. Swanson?
I think they refer to it as like a teacher residency, but if we could expand the language to say, alternative license opportunities, something along those lines. So,
Yeah, I'd heard that they had a preferred term other than...
It was lateral entry in our day.
Yeah. All right, alternative licensing? Okay. Great, thank you. Thank you both. All right, so then under student well-being, we had increased investments in support personnel. And I think this was specifically talking at the ratios for school counselors, psychologists, social workers, and nurses. Any update to that language, Mr. Swanson?
I believe in my conversations with Senator Adcock, there's been language, I know we're a Tier 3 county, and there's been some legislation that has prioritized those Tier 1 and 2 counties with a full-time nurse. So I'm wondering if we keep that language, but instead of saying, Tier 3 counties, it may be years before we get this, but centering it around the well-being of our students by painting the picture to the leadership at the General Assembly that, in order to have strong academics, our students' mental health and well-being must also be intact. So I think if we kind of frame it around, and again, I can play with some language and get it to us on Friday, but I think we should keep that, but just make sure that we're centering through the lens of, a strong student academically, also as a strong student. And I think I lost the point I was trying to make, but something along those lines of just keeping that language, but not just limited to those Tier 1 or 2.
Well, you bring up a good point, talking to Senator Adcock. As a nurse, she's talked about the importance of nurses in the schools and how right now with the current ratios, we'll have one nurse spread over, 4 or 5 schools. And, maybe it's simply looking at how those positions are allotted, and maybe, I know that there was a proposal at one point, I don't know if it's her legislation or not, that would have just said, what about just one nurse per school or something? But let's develop that one some more and bring that on Friday. Thank you. Next, we had maintaining the expansion of reduced cost lunch benefits for students. Is there any update to that? Are we good with that? Do we want to continue that? Ms. Edmonds?
Yes, continue, but I'd like to be more aggressive and say universal meals. There is an organization that is pushing for that at the state level. It's called School Meals for All, I believe, is the name of the organization.
Okay. So there's a suggestion to expand that to universal meals. I will tell you that I'm not prepared to support that without more information. I've heard several arguments for universal meals, but I've heard arguments against them as well. And so I know I'm just one member, so y'all could easily outvote me, but I would have personally some hesitation in going that far until we've had a chance to discuss it as a board and really sort through those pros and cons. Ms. Caulfield?
So I kind of like both ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to be able to universally help all of the children and make it a little bit easier and a little bit more uniform.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same point, I know that when we did that during COVID, I felt that there was a lot of wasted resources and that it's not necessarily needed in all areas. So maybe we can have somewhere in the middle, that kind of discussion where it's a little bit easier for these children to apply, more people to qualify, but that we're a little bit more efficient. And maybe that's the details you're talking about, I'm not sure, but that's the one problem that I did see with it.
Vice Chair Johnson-Hostler?
No surprise, you all know that I have a strong advocate for universal meals, and thank you, Ms. Evans, for mentioning the organization that we've attempted to work with over the last couple of years. I personally do believe that it's something that I'd want to see on our legislative agenda. Very similarly, some of our Tier 1 communities already have this, and so to Mr. Swanson's point, there are a lot of things that are already in place that don't include Tier 3 like us. But the pushback that I would have on that, well, actually, it's not pushback, it's actually a recommendation, is I think it would be very important for this board to have the same access of information that I've had the great privilege of getting to know Ms. DeLuca and what we do. Part of what you're saying, Ms. Caulfield, is the concern, but that is not up to Wake County Public Schools to decide how kids get access to lunch. It's a federal requirement, so those aren't things that we can actually change. The way that we give food is problematic. We give kids whole apples. We can't slice them. So a lot of the waste that there's a ton of research, but a lot of what you're saying is things that we actually can't control. These are USDA guidelines that we can't control at the state or local level. There are things that Ms. DeLuca and her team can tell you. They know, they've done the work of which schools need them and use them. And essentially, that's my recommendation, is to have Ms. DeLuca come and talk about this, because she's looked at it across districts. She's looked at it. She's given us data on what it would mean for our most high-need schools versus across the entire district. So the work has been done. She's got the data to support it. She also can share with us the impact that it is, because we're an enterprise in Wake County, which is also financial implications to moving to this, because what is paid by the federal government, which you all have heard this when we were asked to raise meal prices, the allotment doesn't actually cover the cost that it costs to purchase the food. So there are a lot of implications. And while I support it, and Mr. Luca knows I support it, I still think it's important, if we're going to consider this, that the whole board hear the entire picture.
So one of the things I would suggest in the language is if you talk about the expansion of no-cost meals, that the language talk about it being done at no cost to local districts. And so that would avoid a cost coming to the district, because that really is the difference between being Tier 1, 2, and 3 and whether or not you can do it. So just a suggestion.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both. And I think there is modification of the language where we could capture a move to universal, but it's just, maintaining the expansion of reduced cost and no cost lunch, or just putting it in there. So it is an expansion, it is a commitment to go in that direction, but does allow for that additional information, perhaps. Ms. Emmons?
Just an editorial comment to support what Tyler Swanson said earlier. This is good governance, is when, even when you might have some disagreements, you have a conversation about it. So I look forward to that on Friday.
All right, and we will put it on the agenda for discussion on Friday. All right, increased school safety funding. Everyone good? All right. Fully fund the needs of students with disabilities. And again, we've talked about how there's different ways to do this. There is, in some cases, changing the percentages of students that the state will fund, and then there's times where it's not the percentage that's the issue, but the dollars per student in the funding being insufficient for the services that are needed. So, yes, Ms. Mahaffey?
I'm curious if this needs to explicitly say, for additional months of employment for staff to help with IEP implementation and effectiveness, if that's something that we want specifically spelled out.
As
I'm going
opposed
to
to
defer
just
to
an
Mr.
allotment.
Swanson, our resident special education expert.
Mr. Swanson?
I would say yes, and then a yes and, or it's a both and approach. I also think we need to lift up the formula that our special education students, that funding formula. And I think when Dr. Ng and Ms. Coughlin and I went down to Jones Street and talked to the legislators about this, they didn't understand this formula. And so I think we need to spell that out and lift up the point that Ms. Mahaffey made so they can also see that we can't service our students to the best of our abilities if we don't have the staff and we're using a system, a formula that is 30 years old. So I would love to see both of those highlighted.
Excellent.
As well as for the AIG students as well, that same language.
Oh, all right, I will apply that to both of those items. Next one, fund extended learning opportunities. And I got a board member question, what are extended learning opportunities? And so I will put that to you all. How are we defining that?
I believe this was looking at,
Right, I didn't know if this was summer programs, if this was after school, if this was,
we kept it open because it would allow for tutoring, it would allow for additional interventions. I'm reading this, and I think those were the ideas that we were going for at the time, without specifically pigeonholing tutoring, knowing that there were other opportunities available, similar to the grant that was just presented. And if that's something that is actionable that we want to continue beyond a 2 or 4 year grant cycle.
so is that something you think we need more specificity in to describe what this is?
If we're struggling with it right now, we probably need to pull it out.
So when I was looking at this from that special education background, when I look at extended learning, I'm thinking of our students who may regress over the summer. And it's a section on the IEP, and I'm looking at Dr. Taylor, that it's the extended content learning piece. And so if we're going to keep this language here, I think we need to kind of flesh it out a little bit more, because it can hit so many different buckets. And if we're not necessarily talking about the tutoring aspect, but maybe that's employment opportunities for teachers to help our students that may regress over the summer, that may need some additional support, then we might want to just go on and name that and give them as much detail as possible by saying how many students that could impact.
And maybe paid professional development for those teachers.
Could we just use the word additional instead of extended?
Right, I just didn't know if extended had some specific meaning in an education setting.
Yeah, so really, that can go in almost any direction that you want. When you talk about extended learning, it's going to be anything that happens outside the classroom with the teacher. And so whether that's tutoring or remediation during the school day, after school, during the summer, just any time that's going to be outside the classroom. So I assume that's what you meant when you said that, in having more money and more flexibility to use it for extended learning. I would assume that's what you all were talking about, right?
We go to Mr. Hershey and then Dr. Ng.
Do we need to make it so it's not education speak? If we're, we're having to have a discussion about what exactly it is. If you put it in front of some General Assembly person, are they going to know? So
Right, I think that's what we're trying to do, is get more clarity.
But I'm saying, do we just change the word extended learning?
Potentially.
Are they going to,
I think we just found some agreement that we may need to re-wordsmith the whole thing.
Okay.
Okay, Dr.
I
Ng?
was for that, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to, I think this point is probably the weakest of our agenda because it's just so vague. I think we need to be more concrete and more directed as to what we're asking for. I mean, if it is for, allowing the teachers to do, tutoring or whatever, whatever the things that we want to provide for the students' best interest, I think we need to spell it out.
Okay, great. I think we're in agreement on that. Ms. Evans, is that your?
We are. I just was going to say that I'd advocate for removing the interrupted learning of the pandemic piece. As it's been well publicized, we in Durham County are back to pre-pandemic levels, and we know that that's not sufficient. So this is still necessary, this is still needed, and
Great. That's a very good specific edit that we can make there to help update the agenda. Thank you. The other one, fund broadband and technology support professionals. I did have a question that came to me about schools need to improve the technician to device ratio to ensure students, I know we've talked about it in our local budget as well. Is this still a state concern? Is this still a priority? I don't know a good reason to take it off. I just didn't know in terms of priorities if this was still.
I know Chief Budula is not here right now, but I believe the last time we spoke about this, we had about 194 professionals servicing, coming up on 199 schools. So
Okay.
I believe that's.
You would advocate for
I
keeping it?
would still advocate for that as much, yeah.
All right. Thank you. All right.
Because I live in the county and I still got infrastructure needs.
And broadband.
I do.
All right. So next, we had the legislative support, expand K-3 class size waivers. And based on Ms. Edmonds' comments at our last work session, I wanted to just rename this to allow flexibility for K-5 class size, because that is the same thing as requesting the waiver. This maybe opens up some other options, and it's clear that we also need that flexibility in 4 and 5, whereas we've seen legislative proposals to restrict that further. Mr. Swanson?
Could I add one piece to it? Because I'm not a legislator, but if I'm just reading this and I'm hearing that, the K-3 is such a great idea or was a great thing, I need to also see why expanding this would be great, a better option. And maybe a little caveat to it for, certain schools that are A-B. And I know Ms. Edmonds hate that report card piece, but at least it's not saying it's to all schools. And it's to those schools that have continued to make growth or whatnot, to give them a little bit more of a okay to, change this very popular, quote unquote, piece of legislation.
I understand where you're coming from, and I think that we can, in some of the definitions here, really specify the benefit of that flexibility is to allow customization to meet like school-by-school needs.
Correct.
Okay, all right.
Has a big impact in you and I's district.
That's right.
The most. So I think really spelling that out, because we're going to
Well, and that's my concern with tying it to a school letter grade, because those are the schools that are tending to be overcrowded, and then you're dealing with capping and 35 kids in a
Well, no,
fourth or fifth grade class.
I interpreted it the other
Did I
way, which
misinterpret
was
that?
if you had the A or B grade, that you could get the flexibility, because how can you show that that crowded classroom is negatively impacting teacher performance and student
Understood.
achievement if they're all coming in at the A-B level?
I see. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I was like, hold on.
We have a different perspective?
I understand it now, but
I don't have a different, I don't disagree, but then I can tell you what my long-term concern has been, is allowing your A-B schools have the flexibility, is that also gives them more teachers because of their ADM, which allows them to offer classes that reduce the impact of them choosing our magnet schools or schools of choice that we need to reduce overcrowding. Because if every school in your 3 districts can have every alternative teaching K-5, you're going to continue to crowd those schools with high flyers. You're going to continue to have A-B schools, which then starves the rest of the district. So I personally don't think you should tie it to that level of flexibility, because it actually long-term still harms the entire district. So the language here could be fleshed out a little bit, but I do believe that for me, when we initially wrote this, oh, good Lord, when when K-3 really happened, was actually around the fact, actually your districts where your schools, or actually any of our older schools technically, it was all about there was nowhere to put them, right? So it's about spacing, which is actually where I still think that flexibility does not harm any part of the district by acknowledging that the flexibility for individual schools could be for very different reasons, like the number of classes in a building. For me, as someone who's a strong proponent of pre-K, I don't want to take pre-K classes out of a school because we need it for K through 3 because they're on the first level, which is where we have to put those classes. So that's the kind of flexibility that I believe is probably more beneficial to the entire district.
Great points. Dr. Ng?
I just, being, somebody who didn't have the context before being on the school board, the language is very much convoluted to me. It's like a double negative, and it's hard for me to understand, okay, what are we driving at? So I think, some wordsmithing may be involved before we but I agree that the flexibility, is a key point of it that we need to include.
Great, thank you. All right, next we would go to the very familiar item, allowing school calendar flexibility. I know that we continue to need this. Every year we get emails from parents about this. We struggle with our teacher work days, with our storm days, with everything else. Is there anything in this language that you think needs to be updated? Again, this language was specific, I thought a very modest ask, basically just allowing us to align our school calendar with the community college calendars. It's not the complete flexibility that I know a lot of districts have been asking for, that a lot of districts would want. I know that we've been challenged for over a decade in getting what we would want, what we would need. So here, it's just presented in such a way as aligning it with the community colleges to allow the students with opportunities to take community college classes and to complete exams before the winter break.
Keep on keeping on.
Keep on keeping on? All right. And then the final item we had on here was support gun safety legislation, and specifically, we say we call for lawmakers to pass a state statute requiring safe storage of firearms. All good? Okay. So those are the ones that were on the agenda, plus the addition, the expansion of the K-3 class size to flexibility for K-5 class size. Then we had some other suggestions that came in. Mr. Swanson, did you have anything on the existing agenda?
I don't know not sure if it falls in that, but I'll wait till you finish up and then.
Okay. So then the other three items that I had that we had talked about or that anyone had emailed me about or had been brought up in another meeting were the payday flexibility for staff, the issue that just came up that we just talked about, vouchers and accountability, specifically looking at what we had seen in some other education affiliated organizations and what they were asking for. And then there was some discussion about impact fees and being able to fund educational needs those ways. So those are the three that I had, Mr. Swanson. Did you have one to add to that?
I'm wondering how can we have our strategic plan. And so I'm wondering how do we connect those 4 pillars back to our strategic plan priorities and connect the aims with the legislative agenda or the goals of the legislative agenda. So our legislators see that this is, it benefits, not only it benefits our schools, but it's aligned with our strategic plan. So I don't know how we could flesh that out, but it's just a suggestion that I.
So I think there's a lot of value to that. Off the top of my head, what I would propose is that after we work a little bit more on the wording and the specific items, that then we invite staff in, the staff that has worked with our strategic plan, and then, communications staff, and get their input on how we can do that, and bring something back and sort of see how we can make the two complement each other. Okay, thank you. So regarding that payday flexibility, I mean, it does sound like all of us here support greater flexibility for the district in our ability to pay our staff. Some of it might be permitted under current statutes, some of it might require legislative changes to extend out to everybody that we'd like to see receive the benefits. I guess my question to you all is, do we want to include this on the agenda? I'm in favor of it, but then also how far or how expansive do you want to make our ask? Ms. Mahaffey, this was your original idea, so I want to give you the opportunity to.
Yeah, I think, there are clearly, I think now 3 general statutes that cover this. The one that you cited, ones that I know Rod and I had talked about previously, prohibiting teachers or principals, supervisors from getting that biweekly pay. I would imagine, and again, I'm not a payroll expert, it may be easier to only have 2 payroll periods. So to see that general statute, I think it's 115C-28521. And then the other one that I'm curious about is one that says it requires local boards of education to establish dates on which monthly salaries shall be paid to state allotted teachers. The statute further talks about a monthly rate of pay and requires that each paycheck include a full monthly payment. One of the things when I was teaching that was so helpful, because it is a 10-month position, was that I could cast that 10 months over 12. So it may not be my full rate of pay, but I was able to access a steady paycheck over those summer months. It made it so that I was able to budget and did not have to get a second job because I had income coming in. And so I'm not sure what the wordsmithing would be, but I think those 2 pieces would greatly help our staff. As I know I've personally spoken with teachers who have taken different positions that are 12-month positions in leaving the classroom because they can't afford to get a retail job over the summer. And it's so much uncertainty during that time.
So, Ms. Mahaffey, what I found in the statute was there is a provision here that says the school employees, but again, I think this is the distinction between the classified and the certified. So some of our staff can make that request, even if they were only 10 or 11-month employees, to be paid in 12-month installments. And so I guess what this would do is to find those that don't receive that benefit and extend that to them.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Are there any comment or feedback on that? Vice Chair Johnson-Hostler.
I'm on a broken record roll today. You heard Ms. Wells speak to when we initially looked at this we began in 2016, we actually asked for twice a month pay and spreading it over 12 months. So again, I feel like y'all are really giving me Christmas gifts. Thank you. You just missed my birthday, so maybe it's birthday gifts. But I say that to say one of the things that, and I think Mr. Nieder's probably here, I can't see past this wall over here, but one of the things, and Mr. Swanson just brought this up, is that the offering is that the State Employee Credit Union allows that. I'm not sure how many of you got this email, but I just said to Mr. Swanson, they'd have to have a bank to do that. And I got an amazing email from one of our hourly employees who thanked us for this conversation and reminded me that he also thinks it's wise for us to ask hourly staff how many use payroll cash advancements to bridge paychecks because they don't have the stability that we can sit here and talk about. And so when Mr. Swanson just recommended that, I was like, well, I have an immediate response because I have an email from someone who spoke to appreciating my ability to articulate my own experience that people who live paycheck to paycheck do not have the resources that we have the privilege to speak to and from as board members. So it was perfect timing for me to share this email that I just received. So I would echo your sentiments, Ms. Mahaffey.
All right, Mr. Swanson, did you have just general affirmation? All right. All right. All right, is there any other discussion on that payday flexibility? And by that, I mean both how many times a month and the ability to spread a 10 to 11-month period over 12. Okay. All right. So then the next one I had was on vouchers and accountability. And so this, I believe, originated in our discussion about some language I think we took from the Superintendent's Association about increased accountability measures for recipients of public funds. Now, since that time, I did a little more research, and when I say I did research, I asked other people who knew more than I did. And what I was told is that there were provisions made in the most recently adopted state budget to require some additional testing. I believe, like 3rd, 8th, and 11th grade, and something else for anybody that received these funds. It is a limited measure, but it is an accountability measure. So I just wanted to make sure, and that you all were aware of that, so that if we make the ask for more accountability, we don't ask for the same or less than the legislature has already implemented, that this would be moving beyond that. Okay, so Ms. Edmonds, I know that you have some very,
Strong feelings?
thank you, on this subject. Go right ahead.
So I do want to respond to the testing piece. What my understanding, and Dr. Taylor, correct me if I'm wrong, what they did is they are going to require public school students to take new tests with the voucher recipient students. So our public school students are getting additional testing with voucher students so that they can be compared, rather than the voucher recipient students being required to take the like EOGs, EOCs that public school students are already required to take. So that's that. But I am prepared with because I wanted to go further and call for a moratorium on the vouchers, and I've got that language ready. And so I modeled it after what we have here. And so the heading would be fully fund public schools, not vouchers. The question why is the majority of North Carolina's children are educated in public schools. Public schools need full funding support from the state in order to realize increased student achievement and success. So I was trying to keep it short and succinct, modeled after what the format is here. I'm happy to bring it back on Friday, but
Yeah.
that's what I've got.
So let's take that, and since that's the actual proposal, we'll take that as our model, as our starting place.
If I can, real quick. So I've got pulled up what we talked about. It was from the North Carolina Association of yes, thank you. And it's under item 3, and it's the 3rd bullet.
Okay, thank you, because I was trying to pull up that language right now. All right, do we have any initial discussion or reaction to Ms. Edmonds' amendment or suggestion? Ms. Caulfield?
Thank you.
Oh, and really quickly, Ms. Edmonds, would you mind just being able to email that to all the board members so that we can see it while we're discussing it? Thank you.
So
Go ahead,
I
Ms.
understand Ms. Edmonds' passion, so I just respectfully have a different opinion, where I don't want to, I would rather us be the choice. That is the goal, and I recognize that. To not recognize that, I think, is dismissing the families it does not work for, or it is not working for at the current moment. But our goal is to change that, right? So recognizing that, I think that all taxpayers have a vested interest in what happens to the students. Still, I will reiterate, I want them to be public. My kids are public. I have, my entire lineage is all public education. But I do know that in certain circumstances, it does not work for them. But that child still has the right to have the same education. It's just going to be in a different place and look a little differently. So that their parents are paying, or family members, whoever, are paying tax money that the schools get for their child to go to school. And now, because it's not working for them, they now have to put their kids somewhere else. So there are two sides to this argument, and I think we can't just say it's cut and dry, because it's not. That's to dismiss the fact that it doesn't work for children. I happen to know somebody right now that just in his senior year, playing sports, doing quite well, was just really having a hard time. and it was a very difficult decision. The entire family goes to public, but that one individual child has now pulled out and is doing, it's not even homeschooling, it's something like that, because they just couldn't do it. To deny the fact that those children are out there, and especially after the pandemic in large numbers, I just think is unfair to the taxpayers to say that we just will not acknowledge vouchers being an option. And from what I understand, unless I understand it incorrectly, they do start in tiers as far as income. Is that not correct?
That was the old way. That was a means test, and you would qualify for the voucher based on demonstrated financial need. But now it's more of a universal voucher that any family could apply for regardless of financial.
Right, but how they were awarded. Somebody just sent me an article that it was awarded to a certain tier first, and then once the funds are filled. So by the time it gets to the people who are more accessible to
Yeah.
the funds, that option is actually limited to make sure that the people who do not necessarily have those funds.
Okay. Let's find out more about that, because
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. I know, and Vice Chair Johnson-Hostler made this point, in the history of the fund, it's never run out of funding. So it hasn't been that it gets to a certain point and then there's no more money for higher needs, because it's always had an excess of funding.
So the
But-
amount or the positions are endless? Because I thought it was cut off.
So that's what I don't know under this legislation. Dr. Ing, I don't know if you know, or if we could get, maybe we can get clarification by Friday.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly look up some of the statistics currently, but I do believe that, I mean, we are in uncharted territory, and the Opportunity Scholarship is open to everyone, but the awarding of that is tiered based on income, and therefore, you know, they are prioritizing Tier 1, which is the lowest income, and then as they get to the Tier 4, I think it is, that's when, you know, you're basically, if the money is still there, then you would be still in a lottery system. So that means that you are still providing an option for people who can't afford it, and therefore, you know, it's still preferentially for people who are lower socioeconomic class. And so I think that, like Ms. Caulfield said, you know, to deprive people of the voucher means you're depriving people who do need that option but cannot pay for it. So.
Thank you, Dr. Ing. I do want to point out, and I hope I don't upset them by doing this, we do have two folks in the room I want to introduce to you, Sarah and Caitlin from Brubaker and Associates. Sarah and Caitlin are working with us as our legislative advisors and counsel, part of our government relations team. They'll be joining us for the retreat on Friday. And so some of, I guess, what they're hearing today are some of the issues where they'll be able to provide more guidance about where we have questions about specific legislation, how it might be implemented, how it might be funded. So if you have very specific questions like this, those are some things that hopefully we can have them assist us with. Thank you. Mr. Hershey. Well, I'd like everyone to get a chance before.
So my only point is this, is I have empathy for those that may struggle, but we are a public school board, and we should be advocating strictly for public schools, not for voucher programs that send kids to private schools. I have a real problem that we're having to, that this is, I don't mind, debating the language is fine, but this is our job. Our job is to advocate for public schools, not for private schools. So I don't really understand why we're having a debate about whether vouchers are good or not. Public schools are underfunded in this country, specifically in this state. General Assembly has willfully gone against a court order to fund public schools. I have no concerns about the voucher program. That voucher program is going to be enormous in size. It is not going to be limited to those at Tier 1. The richest of the rich people are going to get this voucher program. We should not in any way be be worried about vouchers as in any way advocating for them as a public school board entity. I apologize for hitting the table, but I just think this is ridiculous. We're underfunded and we're talking about vouchers. Come on.
So before, I just want to hit everybody at least one time before we come back. Vice Chair Johnson-Hostler.
I was similar to Mr. Hershey, and I absolutely sympathize and understand families have to make different decisions. That's not my argument. My argument of why this is important is very similar to what you just said, Mr. Hershey. It is our job to ensure that any funding the General Assembly has does go to this whole list of priorities that we've listed, because public schools have been direly underfunded for my entire tenure on this board. So that's, for me, our priority, is not to debate whether it works or not, because that's a personal choice that we all get to make and every parent gets to make. But it is, for me, clear as a board that it is our job to advocate for the direct fiscal impact that it has, and it will continue to have on our public school. So that's the first thing. But the second thing that I'll say, and again, I wasn't going to say it, but I do agree with a few of my colleagues, is we can't ignore the fact that they increased the financial, removed pretty much the means test, because the money was not being spent. You want to know why? Because poor families can't afford the rest of what they would have to pay for private schools, nor the exorbitant cost, or I can speak personally for friends, that they also sending their kid to a private school when they don't have the same access and privilege puts their kid not at a financial disadvantage, but a relational disadvantage. Their experiences aren't the same, the exposure isn't the same, and there's a ton of data that you can actually look at that shows the impact of sending a kid who is in poverty with a school to a school that is highly affluent with resources. The perfect example we hear all the time is I sent my kid to this school. We're back at public school because, spring break, they went to Italy, and my kid is like, excuse me, where on the map is this? Because I'm in the third grade. That's the reality of these families. So expanding this, for me, is clear that they know from the experience that we've had in this state. Things could change, I won't argue that, but currently those families have not used it, and that is why the fund has not been expended to date. So expanding it to, if you talk about data, you don't generally expand something if it hasn't been used by your targeted community. Because if you expand it, it should be about the accessibility to the families that you say that you intend it for, and the expansion, in my opinion, has gone the opposite direction. So I wouldn't be arguing if they said, we'll pay 100% for people in poverty or Tier 1 families. That's a different conversation, but that's not the direction that this legislation has gone in.
Thank you. All right, so coming back around, eeny, meeny, miny, moe. Let's start with Ms. Edmonds, and then we'll go to Dr. Ng.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that what this is about for me, this is the Wake County Public School Board's legislative agenda, and our literal duty is to advocate for what this district needs. And we are not getting it, and that is what this is about. So I do have strong feelings about it on a personal level, and, for others that support the program overall, that's great. We're in a voting season. You can vote for people that support private school vouchers. But the duty of this board, and my role as a board member, along with the rest of you, is to advocate for what this district needs. That is literally part of our oath, and that is what this is about.
Thank you. And Dr. Ng.
We're kind of mincing words, but I think the old saying that the grass is always greener on the other side, assuming there is another side, right? So I think that we have to, understand that is the reality, that there is another other side that people can choose. And I agree with Ms. Edmonds in that I agree with you. I'm listening. We are advocating for public school, and so I'm fine with the verbiage of fully funding public schools, because we want to make sure that public schools is a great option for people, and we want it to be the best option. So. Yes, I'm fine with that language, but we still need to kind of wordsmith that part of it to make sure that we are, in a way, staying in our lane.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Ng, and thank you, Ms. Edmonds, for sending that. I'm going to have to cut that off, Ms. Edmonds, because, or sorry, Ms. Caulfield, because we're at 4:45, and we do have our swearing-in ceremony starting shortly. And I want to get to the other issue. What we'll do is we'll take Ms. Edmonds' language, we'll circulate that, and have that for just any continued wordsmithing or discussion at the retreat. All right. So then the other issue was about the talk about impact fees. And Ms. Caulfield, you had brought that up. So I wanted to give you an opportunity, if you had anything further on that you wanted to bring up, if you wanted to advocate for that as part of the agenda, or just even to be on our discussion for the retreat.
I think I would like it to just to be a discussion, and if we can have some more information about the statute and legal end of things.
Yeah, I've got a memo drafted that I'll send out tomorrow.
Okay.
Great.
I do have a meeting, but I do believe that the meeting is going to take place after our retreat, so I won't
Yeah.
necessarily have that information, but I could provide an update once I do, but.
I appreciate that. I'd asked Mr. Malone to go through and kind of prepare for us something we could look at that could be a resource about sort of the history of the issue, legislative action on it, and then the court action on it. And it's a complicated issue. So
I've got it, and I'll send it to you tomorrow.
yeah.
Yes.
And then what we can do is that it can come up in our discussions at the board retreat, but it sounds like, unless it really catches fire, maybe it's part of an ongoing conversation. Is that sort of what you want to do? Because I know you said you had a meeting set up before you wanted to commit to it. Is that right?
Well, I'd like to commit to it regardless.
Okay.
But if somebody's going to give me pushback for something that they can or cannot do, then I just need to understand what that is. From what I understand, we had done it in the past, and then it changed. So I know other states do it, and I don't see, except for the developer's, pocketbook, to be honest, I really don't see how it would be a negative effect for anybody. I think it would help our schools, our communities, if the developers could, if they're bringing the community and family members in, we're going to need to put them in a school. So it just only makes sense that they should contribute to what we need for our amenities to serve those children.
Okay. Well, we will have that conversation, and we'll get more information. Mr. Malone will share that, and then we can explore that further. Is there anything else in the, I'll say, 3 minutes that we have left that anyone would like to introduce or bring up that we can prepare in advance of the retreat? All right. If not, we have our notes. I think we have our marching orders. I'll continue to work with Dr. Taylor and to prepare, getting all the materials prepared for the retreat, and we will take it from there. I don't believe, Vice Chair Johnson-Hostler, we have any further business on the work session agenda? All right. Then what we'll do is we'll adjourn the work session, and we'll let everybody transition for the swearing-in ceremony. Thank you very much.